Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the April 11th, 2017 Board of Education meeting. If you would please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, approval of the agenda. Does anybody have anything that they would like to change right off on the agenda? Okay. We'll do consent agenda later, but do you have agenda items specifically?
No.
Okay. Then let's move on to 4.0, recognitions and reports. I believe we have Danielle Clark, Executive Director of Communications, here to lead our recognitions and reports this evening.
Tonight we have a talented student athlete, skilled musicians, and an outstanding speller.
Thank you, Dr. Smizer, Mrs. Kipp, members of the board and community. First up, we're going to call Mrs. Connie Clivey. She is PSD's contest coordinator, and she is going to talk about the district spelling bee and our champion, Haley Kendall, a sixth grader at Ridgeview Classical. If Haley's here, would you like her to come on? Not yet. She'll call you up. Oh. Mr. Donovan, would you like to join us? No, sorry, Mr. Fevre, would you like to join us? Wrong one.
Hi, thank you, members of the board and Dr. Smizer. I'll first briefly explain the bee process. The schools hold a site spelling bee, and then the winner of the spelling bee takes the district written test. Then the top kids, the top 20 scores from the written test, come to our district bee here. And it's a lot of work for these teachers on top of their teaching to do all their work for the bees. So I'd like to thank all of their hard work, the office managers, the bee coordinators, and the principals. Without all they do at the schools, we wouldn't have a district bee here. And I'd also like to thank Darren Marshall from Fossil Ridge High. He always does an amazing job as our MC. Now, the top 10 kids from our district bee qualify to go to the state bee, and I would love to honor them by quickly reading their names. They are Sophia Delata, 5th grader at Bethke, Jackson Drigg, 5th grader at Zach, Ben Grumble, 7th grader at Weber, Wolfgang Jekyll, 5th grader at Ridgeview Classical Elementary, Mira Juniper, 6th grader at Lincoln, Haley Kendall, 6th grader at Ridgeview Classical Middle School, Amber Kranz, 7th grader at Liberty Common Middle School, Danny Rinchuzo, 4th grader at O'Day, and Thomas Stroyan, 5th grader at McGraw. And congratulations to all of them. They were wonderful representatives for Poudre School District. Now for our district champion. Haley, will you come join me, please? This year, our spelling bee went 43 rounds. But 25 of those rounds was just between Haley and our runner-up, Ben Grumbles from Weber. It was getting ridiculous. I was panicking that we were going to run out of time. Darren was talking about bringing in dinner. These kids were not missing words. We have some amazing young spellers, folks. And at the state level, the kids have to take a pretty rigorous written spelling test and vocabulary test to qualify to go to the oral portion. And Haley did just that, and I've been told by Mom she went to the top 32, so we'd like to give her a round of applause for that. We always post the winning word, but more times than not, that's not the toughest word these kids have spelled during the day. And a few of Haley's words that she spelled were imam, ambiguity, obsequious, egalitarian, and beleaguer. And as only a sixth grader, I have no doubt we're going to see more of this young lady. So, as our champion this year, as only a sixth grader, I'd like to present this trophy, and it says Poudre School District, Haley Kendall, 2017 Spelling Bee District Champion. And so you'll never forget your winning word, Swahili is, and quotes. Congratulations to Haley.
I would have been proud to spell half the words she just listed correctly. And Haley, I want to tell you it is very humbling to present you this award. I really congratulate you on behalf of the board for this incredible honor. So, here's your award.
went to elementary school at Stove Prairie Elementary.
So while Haley continues the Walk of Fame, we have our second honoree, Miss Kendall Wilson from Poudre High School, and our state wrestling champion for the 138-pound classification, Jacob Greenwood. Is Jacob with us this evening, Kendall? He's not. So Kendall will talk a little bit about Jacob and receive his recognition on his behalf.
Good evening, Board of Education and Dr. Smizer. We had an exciting turnout at the state wrestling tournament this year at the Pepsi Center. We had 10 state qualifiers, 5 state placers. Our Poudre High School ended up taking 4th place. Our state champion, Jacob Greenwood, could not join us tonight. Both him and the coach had a previous wrestling engagement. He was voted for the 2nd time in a row Outstanding Wrestler, which is very rare. Two other side notes to note is that our team was regional champs, and we had 5 conference champions. Coach Golier was named Conference Coach of the Year, and then Poudre took back the City Champs trophy from Rocky, which was the first time since 2008. So that was very exciting. I'd like to thank our coaches. They're an incredible group of individuals if you haven't met them, and they're the reason that our boys go in and they turn them into men, and we're very proud of them at Poudre High School. So thank you for recognizing them.
On behalf of the board, I'd like to congratulate Jacob for winning the 5A 2017 Colorado State Wrestling Championship for 138-pound classification. And in a former life, I had the joy of driving wrestling teams for the district down to those ungodly early weigh-ins when the sun hasn't been up yet, and it won't for another hour and a half. And in a nod to Haley and our Poudre Athletic Director, if you'd like to stay for the whole meeting, you may be beleaguered. Congratulations, Jacob.
I'd like to spell that for you.
Mr. Pedersen, would you like to join me? Next, we have the Colorado Music Educators Association music groups, and with us this evening, we have Dr. Melissa Flail. She is our music facilitator. So, Dr. Flail, if you'd like to come up and introduce those who joined you down in Denver.
Thank you very much. Board members, you should have a program. Hopefully, I left those earlier. So, CMEA, Colorado Music Educators Association, Clinic and Conference takes place every January at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. And there's a very rigorous competitive audition program that takes place the spring before. And so whenever you send in a recording for this, you don't exactly know what you're going to have the next year. And then they choose your group based on the previous year's group. And if I could equate it to anything, it would be really like the state championship of music ensembles. It's really competitive. Our district has amazing support for music and the arts, and so for that I thank the board and the superintendent and the district leadership. There are many districts that never have a group represented at the Colorado Music Educators Association as a performing ensemble, and we're very fortunate that we often have quite a few. You can only audition every 3 years for each school or each ensemble, and so we've had a couple really heavy years lately, and I think that with knowing that and that we didn't have a lot of people eligible, it's really amazing that we still had several groups represented this year. I want to thank, in addition to all of our leadership, I want to thank all of our music teachers. We know that our secondary music programs, which are represented here tonight, couldn't thrive like they do without our elementary music teachers, and a few of them joined us here tonight. So if you're an elementary music teacher in this room, would you stand and we'll thank you. So I do want to recognize the directors of the ensembles that were selected and performed at the State Music Conference. So first, if Lonnie Abluto would come up. Lonnie teaches orchestra and band at Lesher Middle School, IB World School, and she was representing our district with her oh, now I'm going to forget the name, Chamber Orchestra? Advanced Chamber Orchestra. I looked at it right before this. Advanced Chamber Orchestra, they are made up of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, about 17 students, and they meet really, really early in the morning. So she couldn't come to the 5:30 a.m. music meetings, because that's how I know they meet early. So they did an amazing performance. They had a really talented violin soloist, some really moving pieces, a tribute to her mother-in-law, and the students were just amazing. We want to thank the administration at Lesher, especially Principal Dr. Tom Dodd, for his support of music, and Ms. Obluda for her amazing work. Our other ensemble that was represented was the Symphonic Band at Preston Middle School. Andrea Hollenbeck is the director, and they did an amazing job. They are a larger ensemble, about 76 students, and mostly players in their 3rd year. And Andrea had a personal emergency today. She is fine, but just couldn't be here. So her principal, Amy Schmier, is here to accept on her behalf, so if you would come on up. So the Preston Band was really amazing. They played a lot of new music. They had a commissioned piece. I believe the composer was even there at the performance. An amazing percussion soloist, and so really unique opportunities for these students that they wouldn't normally have. And I know that Andrea would want to thank Amy Schmier, but she would also want to thank her previous principal, Scott Nielsen, for their support as well. And congratulations very much on your students and how they represented us. And we'll keep you guys here for now so that you can go and shake hands. But last but not least, we have a longtime retired educator from Poudre School District, and she was selected for a really exclusive honor, and that is induction into the Colorado Music Educators Association Hall of Fame. And it is a really it's a really high honor. It's a huge nomination process, letter writing, and really a lot of consideration, and not that many people are accepted into that exclusive rank. And so having spent a lot of time at Weber and even at Irish, and still involved, she can't seem to break free from us. She directs our elementary honor choir sometimes. She's an accompanist. She's a guest teacher. And so we would like to recognize Mrs. Linda Hall. And again, I just want to thank everyone, not just the leadership, but also the community and the parents for your support of music in our district. And if you all would like to shake hands with the board members. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Out of order.
So I do want to reinforce that we do value the arts, and in this case music, particularly in this district, and we look forward to continuing to support that strongly going forward. We think it's important both from the point of view of student engagement, but there's also research that says that it supports the academics of the students as well. So I think those are both very good reasons, and we want to thank the community for working with us to help provide that support. As far as the actual honors here tonight, it's tremendous what you and your students have accomplished. Thank you very much. I have been to the CMEA conference before, not this one, but previously, and it is quite an honor and quite an impressive array of music groups that perform there, and to be in that crowd is terrific, and shows what great work you've been able to do and that your students have been able to do. So thank you again, and congratulations.
And that concludes our recognitions this evening. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item 4.4, which is our superintendent report. Dr. Smizer.
Thank you. Since our last meeting, I visited first graders at Harris Bilingual Elementary School. It's become an annual tradition to go read books in both languages to the kids, which is fun. I look forward to it. Every year it's a new batch of kids, so they don't know that I'm there every year. So it's been a lot of fun. Also attended with some of you a community engagement session at the Holy Family Church. I've had individual meetings with several board members. Visited the 10-year celebration for Rice Elementary. I wasn't able to stay very long, but it was a huge crowd that really enjoyed particularly hearing Mr. Rice speak. It's hard to believe that Rice Elementary is 10 years old already. I participated in negotiations with our employee groups and attended the National School Board Association annual conference in Denver. I think board comments will probably reflect. This is an annual conference for elected school board members, which travels around the country, is in a different place every year, and this year was in Denver. So we took advantage of the opportunity to attend some of those sessions. Held an equity and diversity leadership team meeting. Several budget meetings. You'll be hearing more about the budget as we go through the meeting tonight. Quarterly meetings with the Larimer County manager. Attended a Denver area school superintendent's meeting. Although we are not in the Denver area, we are a large district, and so I'm invited to attend with the other large districts in that area. And the talk of all superintendents at this point in time this year is budget, state budget, and what that looks like for us going forward. And you'll hear more about that tonight as well. I participated in several interviews for some new school principals that we will be having next year. I visited Cruz, Preston, Trout, Bolts, Centennial, CLP Middle and Elementary, McGraw, Wellington Middle, Eyestone and Rice, and Weber Middle School and Johnson Elementary. In the district, we have had the PSD Knowledge Bowl competition going on. Student scholarship celebrations are being held in the community and at our school. This is the time of year when our seniors are finding out what scholarships they got out of the many that they have applied for, and it's always phenomenal how many millions of dollars our graduating class receives in scholarship money. Thursday, April 20th at 7:30 is our PSD Foundation annual breakfast event. I welcome you to sign up for that. It is going to be bigger and better than ever this year, and we're excited to move forward with the foundation. The first annual Student Organized Environmental Leadership Conference is also being held in April. Dunn Elementary named their cafeteria for their retired custodian. Super famous and positive and beloved person in that building. I know that just the idea of him not being there is going to be just a little hard to adjust to. Staff appreciation and award ceremonies are being held in the community and in the district this time of year. We're also going to be celebrating our new retirees. We're preparing for graduations. If you have a senior and you have any questions about their graduation status, please contact your counselor. You should know very well by now what's going on with your senior if you have one. Negotiations are wrapping up sometime in the next month or so. There's a Mental Health Matters community event, and 4 PSD schools were named Healthy School Champions, which is an exciting honor for them. And that's my report.
Thank you. And we have 4.5 is our board report, and Rob Pedersen will be giving that tonight. Do you want to pass the clicker?
Pass it over.
There's a bad game of telephone going on up here. We don't know what he's going to do, so yeah.
Do you see it? It's on the side. You got it?
Okay, good. All right, so, yeah, that's right, the board at recess. Okay. All right, so really, we give these reports just to give the community a sense that we do more than just sit up here and chat every couple weeks. We really try to get a good understanding of what's going on in the district and to be a good liaison between the district and the community. And so these are some of the ways that we do that. So in the district, and this represents the combined efforts of all the people on the board. We don't single out who does what. We had visits to multiple schools, as you can see on the slide here: Valley, Bethke, Polaris, Johnson, Rocky Mountain. Our intent is to have at least one of the board members visit every school year. And so we are winding down, and I think we've accomplished certainly most of the visits. I know that at least I have one more to do, and I expect there are other people who have a couple more, but our intent is to get to all of them. We attended the PSD Foundation's Excellence in Education Awards, read to students at Laurel for Read Across America. I think that's Dr. Seuss's birthday. There's a formatting issue here. We participated in the audit committee. The audit committee did not happen at Laurel during Read Across America. That's really a separate thing. Participated in the district accountability committee, the foundation board, and the district advisory board. Attended a bunch of events, including the Poudre Education Association Teacher Appreciation event at Putnam, the Elementary Honor Choir, the Little Kids Rock Birthday Bash, the Scholastic Art Reception, the state basketball playoffs, as Dr. Smizer already mentioned, the Rice 10-year anniversary celebration, a couple of us there as well, and Fort Collins did the musical Mary Poppins, which a couple of us attended. The board also tries to ensure that that we learn how to do a good job, and we keep ourselves well organized. We do have a couple of subcommittees. One of them is effectively completed at this meeting with the expected approval on consent of the superintendent's contract, which includes new evaluation process and document. We also have a continuing subcommittee on community engagement, which we'll talk about when we talk about community activities on the next slide. We had a board retreat focused on that superintendent evaluation process. We attended the CASB Winter Legislative Conference, and as Dr. Smizer mentioned, the National School Board Association Conference in Denver, which was certainly very informative for those who attended. We have informal board lunches so that we work well together. In the community, we have held monthly community engagement sessions. We did hold 2 special community engagement sessions to reach out to our Hispanic community with help from the Holy Family Church and the district staff. We want to thank both of those folks for helping, for the Holy Family Church and all the district staff, including John McKay's folks, who helped put that together. We are always open to reaching out to groups and individuals in the community to understand what you're all thinking about education and the school district in particular. And so if you have an idea for a quote special community engagement like this, where we would reach out and hear more about what your specific group has to say, we're certainly open to that. So please contact any one of us at any time about that. We had individual meetings with a variety of constituents. We attended the Wellington Rotary, Lou Gators Community Engagements. The League of Women Voters had a forum, I think it was last night, was it, Kathy? Last night, on homeless youth? Okay. We met, we do want to keep in touch with the Coloradoan and the press in general, and so we had at least one meeting on school finance issues in preparation for the series that they're doing now. And as you know, we're in ongoing litigation around our bonds, and so there was some need to prepare and testify at one of the hearings earlier in, I guess it was February at this point. I attended the Workforce Development Council, the Early Childhood Policy Council, participated in preparation meetings for meeting with the city folks, and we've done a lot of legislative work. If you hang out till the end, You'll hear some more about where we are on some of the legislative issues that we feel are important. Certainly the legislative calendar is rolling to an end here for the state. And so there's been quite a rush of bills that have come up, and we need to respond to those in some ways. And so we've met with legislators and lobbyists. We've had the legislative subcommittee meet before every one of these meetings, every one of these general meetings that we have. Kathy in particular, and perhaps others, have testified before the legislature in Denver, which I think is really important. Attended regularly the CASB Legislative Resolution Committee and attended forums on the state budget and school finance. So, as I mentioned, we're always open to hearing what you have to say about our school district and education in general. And the next sort of general opportunity for that will be this Saturday from 10 to 11:30 a.m. at the Old Town Library. So we look forward to hearing from you there, and we encourage you to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay. That brings us to 5.0, community comment. And we just have one person signed up to speak tonight. We have Catherine Pawlowski. And let me tell you how it works. We have this podium here. Thank you. I can't even think of the word tonight. For community comment, there's 3 little lights on there. The green one is when you still have 3 minutes. The yellow light will come on when you have 30 seconds left. And when the red one comes on, please wrap it up, because I really hate to interrupt you and tell you to do that. Thank you.
Well, good evening to the board and Dr. Smyser and administration and community members. My name is Catherine Pawlowski. I am the PSD district coordinator for Odyssey of the Mind, as well as a PSD parent of a son at Cruz, a daughter at Bolts, and a proud PSD alumni myself. Odyssey of the Mind is a creative problem-solving program for students kindergarten through 12th grade. The students work together in teams of up to 7 students throughout the school year to prepare 2 performances for our regional tournament in March. Our program is completely hands-on for kids. Volunteer coaches guide the teams along the way, but the ideas, the costumes, the props, and all other components of the performances are all accomplished by the students themselves. As you can see from our handouts, our program complements and supports 21st century skills and STEM initiatives. I'm here tonight with great news. This year we had 16 district schools and close to 300 students participating in Odyssey of the Mind. At our regional tournament in March, 18 elementary teams and 7 middle school teams represented our district at the state tournament held this past Saturday, April 8th. At the state tournament, the top 2 teams in each problem and division are eligible to advance to the Odyssey of the Mind World Finals. World Finals is an international event attended by more than 20 countries. Then this year's event will be held at Michigan State University on May 24th through the 28th. I am proud and pleased to announce that PSD has a record number of 13 teams eligible to attend World Finals this year. Our state, sends 10 elementary teams to World Finals, and this year 8 of the 10 teams are from here in PSD. Our state also sends 10 middle school teams to World Finals, and this year 5 of those teams are from right here in PSD. The elementary schools representing in our district will be Beatty, Bennett, Bethke, McGraw, and Trout. At the middle school level, Kennard, Lesher, and Lincoln will be representing our district. I just wanted to come and share the good news with you tonight. We have much to be proud of in our district, and we would like to recognize all of the teams for their hard work in Odyssey this season. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come and do community comment? Okay. We will continue on then. 6.0, consent agenda. Can I have a motion on the consent agenda, please?
You're going to pull something off.
Yeah, we have.
Okay. So would you want somebody, okay.
I
know
would
we have
like
2
to
people.
state that we would like to pull off 2 items from the consent agenda. I think 6.5 Migrant Education Program 2017-2018 grant application, and 6.6 fiscal year 18 technology refresh.
Okay, those items will become 6.5, migrant education program will become 8.2, and 6.6, technology refresh will become 8.3. And can I have a motion for the remainder of the items on the consent agenda then?
Thank you. I move that the board approve and adopt the recommended actions for the items remaining on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Can I have a second? Susan? Okay, I think we're ready for the roll.
Nate?
Yes.
Kristoff?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
Carolyn?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to 7.0, informational reports. Dr. Smyser.
Hello, there we go. First, we have graduation rates update. Ginger Haberer will lead this informational report, providing an update on grad rates and answering any questions the board may have.
Good evening. When we consider reviewing graduation rates, it's important to start with the end in mind. Our graduation target is that 100% of our students will graduate from high school. Our leading indicator is that 85% of our students will graduate within a 4-year time period, which helps us to gauge, how well we are approaching that target of 100%. Also, if we look at our past track record, PSD's 4-year graduation rate has been consistently higher than the state's 4-year graduation rate for the past 5 years. I think we'd agree that graduation rates are affected by multiple different factors. So, for example, a student's 3rd grade reading level could greatly affect the overall trajectory of a student towards graduation. Tonight, we're going to focus primarily on the actions that we're taking in high school, especially in regards to the early warning system, so that we can really monitor those students who get behind and get them back on track in a timely manner. So this chart demonstrates the 4-year graduation rate for our 2016 graduating class. And when we add our Ascent students back in, we can see that we had an overall increase in our graduation rate to an 83.5%. This chart also demonstrates that for 4 of our subgroups, their 4-year graduation rates were actually less than the 4-year graduation rates for those same subgroups when compared to the state 4-year rates for those subgroups. If we take our Ascent students out, you can see that we still have the same patterns. We still were above the state average overall at 81.4%, and we still had that same pattern with our 4 subgroups, with those 4-year rates being less than the 4-year rates at the state level for those subgroups. So an important part of this early warning system is really being intentional, especially with those additional support students that we've talked about before, and seeing who's off track to graduate. And we use that primarily by looking at our off-track dashboard. And this chart demonstrates how those credits were loaded into that off-track dashboard. So to load these credits, we consider 2 different factors. The first thing that we considered was what are the actual graduation requirements, and then the second thing that we looked at is what is the overall pattern in the ways that students sign up for their classes. So for English, for example, we know that there's 4 years of English that's required for every student. So we loaded 10 credits into the language arts. And then when we looked at past history of how students sign up for classes, most students sign up for math in their 9th grade year. So we added 10 credits in math as well. For the sophomore year, we added another year to math, we added another year to English, and then students need to take 3 years of science. So we added 10 credits, which is equal to a year, to the sophomore off-track dashboard. Then you can see during the junior year is really when we start adding some extra credits to there. So in addition to adding an additional year for math, English, and science, we then started adding some credit for world language, for social studies, and 3 other areas of electives. And so when we saw the 67% of our only 67% of our students were on track to graduate in the DE 1.0 monitoring report, as you remember, it was lower than the other grade levels, which were at 80% or higher. And one of the reasons for that was affected by the fact that if you increase the number of cut points, the number of credits for that junior year, it may also cause the number of students who are flagged as being off track to graduate for that percentage to be higher. So as we started digging deeper into the dashboard, what we discovered is that a more accurate way of saying who is really at most risk as a junior to be off track for graduation, the best way to do that is to get a combined list of students who are behind in science, math, or English. And when counting those students across all of the high schools, it came to about 350 students, juniors, this current year that were most at risk for being off track, which came to about between like 20-25% of our students, as opposed to the 32.5% I think that was in the DE 1.0 monitoring report. However, that's still a call to action. And we have 3 basic ways that across all high schools are doing so much work and have systems in place. Every high school has a system in place in really monitoring the progress of all of our students. And these actions include frequent one-on-one meetings with students, primarily with counselors, but sometimes administrators are involved in that. Sometimes the MTSS teams meet together to discuss, especially like students who have multiple absences, students that are seeing the counselor more frequently. And during these one-on-one meetings, oftentimes we find that students need some wraparound services. So they might need some mental health supports. They might be struggling with substance abuse and may need some extra counseling to help support them. So those one-on-one meetings are critical, not only with students, but also meeting with parents as well. And then during those one-on-one meetings, oftentimes students will look at the student schedule and schedule them intentionally into some of those credit recovery opportunities. And many of our high schools have what's called a Mind Center, which is a period that's offered throughout the day, and it's an opportunity for students to get scheduled in to not only recover credits, but also to receive extra tutoring and just support in getting caught up in some of the classes that they're behind in. A third important intervention that gets put in place across all of the high schools is really looking ahead to say, okay, what do we need to schedule this student for in that next semester? So, for example, if a student fails algebra first semester, the counselors are catching that and saying, okay, we need to make sure that second semester we can schedule that student back into that Algebra 1 so we can get them caught up as soon as possible. Another, I thought, a real creative strategy that high schools use this year as well is to stagger the math classes so that if I'm behind in Algebra 1, I can retake it the second semester and go on and still take geometry at the same time. And if you're interested in seeing what that staggered math curriculum looks like, I can include that in the packet on Friday. Also, we want to think about what are those actions that we're taking across our system, kind of going back to that big systemic view again. And we're really working hard to align our systems all the way through, from the targets that are on the DE 1.0 monitoring report, to our district unified improvement plan, to the school unified improvement plans, down to the data and the actions that are taking place in the classroom. And I really believe that the dashboard and having common language around additional support students, looking at common views of data across the system from the central office all the way down to teachers in the classroom is really going to help us to really build a systemic safety net for our students, so that the minute they slip and they get behind, we're going to be right there to catch them and to get them back on track. So recently, I had a wonderful opportunity to meet with about 8 different students at OU, or Opportunities Unlimited. Just an amazing group of students. And I asked them the question, what caused you to be disconnected, feel like you started to disengage while you're in high school, and what is it about OU that is causing you to feel re-engaged and feel like you're able to keep moving forward to get your diploma or your GED. And it was interesting because they really had some common feelings and some common experiences that they shared. And almost all of them said that they, when they got to high school, most of them didn't really know very many other students, and they said, I just felt overwhelmed with, there are all these students, and in my classroom, the classrooms had all these students in it, and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't feel like I could ask for help because I really didn't know the other students in my class, and because I didn't feel like I could ask for help, started to get behind, and then I didn't know how to do the homework, and then I, kind of started to feel like, one girl said, then all of that started to make me feel like, well, other students don't really care about me, and there's so many kids in the class that maybe not feeling that connection with the teacher, then why should I care? And that was what one girl shared. What another student shared was just wanting to feel like there was a place for him to really explore his personal interests, which are all the things that we've been working on. And so what they had in common about OU really goes back to the connectedness survey and what we're learning about the importance of connections. I'm pointing to Dwayne because we had a great conversation about this. It's just that importance of not only connection to the teacher, but what was really clear in talking to high school students was a connection with their peers as well, that really had an influence on them. And that in that smaller setting with OU, they said, well, yeah, we know each other really well, and we don't feel embarrassed to ask questions in here, and we know our teacher. And I said, well, what's really giving you that motivation or that vision of hope? And every single one of those students was engaged in taking a class at Front Range Community College. And all of them said that they felt like taking that concurrent enrollment class really helped them to realize that, oh, I really could go to college, and there really is a future for me. One student said that he had never really considered college because it seemed like such a process to apply, and I don't know if I really have the money for it. And then at OU, they really walked him through how to sign up for it, and now he's taking an art class and discovered that that's really his passion and that he wants to continue to get his diploma so that he can pursue his dream. So I left feeling just really enthused that all of the work that we're doing with all of our high schools, that we're really on the right track. And I'm confident that as we continue just to keep working together as a system to create that strong safety net, that we will reach that goal, that 100% of our students graduate from high school. So with that, if you have any questions for me, and if you have some specific questions around calculations, I asked Dr. Schmitz to be here and as a backup to answer any those type of specific questions you might have.
Thank you. Board members, questions? Okay, Rob and then Carolyn.
All right, so I actually have 2 questions. If you go back, could you go back to the first chart slide?
Yep.
No, not that one.
This one?
Nope, the other one. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so those percentage differences are comparing what to what? I appreciate you added the second slide.
Yes.
I know you added that from the packet, and that's clear, but I still want to be clear about what these numbers say.
Okay. So the first column of numbers are PSD Ascent numbers,
Yeah.
right? The next column, just to be for clarity, this is the adjusted PSD 2016 rate. So it is the 4-year graduation rate for all those groups where we've included the Ascent students, which there's 44 Ascent students collectively. Just to make a quick point, we include them, I know the board knows this, it's for the viewing public for the most part. In Poudre School District, Ascent students, in fact, have completed all graduation requirements. That statement is not necessarily true for other districts throughout the state. So we're not able to adjust the state's numbers with the state's Ascent student count because we don't know that those students actually met graduation requirements in their local district. We do know that for Poudre School District, Ascent students did in fact meet the graduation requirements.
Right.
But the state, because they have to have one consistent rule, currently does not put Ascent students in the numerator of that calculation. They are having conversations around that, and we actually, I want to throw out that we had a team from PSD that went down just this week, or late last week, Friday, and talked to the CCHE and the CDE. The whole group got together. They actually invited us. We didn't ask for the meeting, and they were able to present this information, and I think it was an eye-opener for a few of the decision makers up there, and they said they're going to be looking into it. So they may actually change some stuff statewide, but at any rate, so that's the second column is our adjusted PSD rate based on those Ascent, those 44 students that are in Ascent. The first column that's got a lot of green in it, change from PSD 2016, is the change from PSD's graduation rates for each of those groups as calculated by the state when we include our Ascent students, okay? And that last column is the change in the PSD adjusted rate where we included our Ascent students from the similar state graduation rate for the entire state of Colorado, not for PSD.
So the comparison in the last column is the adjusted PSD rate against the unadjusted state rate because we can't adjust the state rate.
Correct.
Okay, that seems a little funky, right? Because some,
But we're not, I hear where you're going, but
Yeah.
we're not obviously trying to
No,
make
I
up a
understand.
story.
Yeah, the next slide makes it very clear, and
Right.
that's fine. So, so some clarity is good. So I appreciate your sharing that.
Yeah.
Could I
Sharing
intrude
that
for
with
one
us.
second here?
Yeah.
There's actually a bill going through the state legislature
Yeah,
right
that's right.
now that is going to make it so that this could be part of our official graduation rate statewide. It would include the Ascent students that have met the graduation requirements, and that's apparently flying through. So it could very well be that this is great data because it will be comparable from this year to next. Just saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If I could launch off that, I think one of the reasons we got invited down to the state to talk to them a little bit about this issue is because Poudre High School is a poster child for what is wrong with the way the state is doing it. They had 26 Opportunity Unlimited students, which means they brought in students we knew were not on track to graduate. That went into their denominator and not their numerator. Then on top of that, they had 44 Ascent students, 26 of which, we had 44 district-wide, 26 of which, the lion's share, were at Poudre High School. So they had that double whammy, and it made a big, big impact on their graduation rate.
Right.
So they're a poster child. You know,
Yeah.
we're hoping
No,
for
I-
change.
Let me be absolutely clear. I think it is absolutely reasonable to include those Ascent students in the graduation rate, and that example is a good reason to do that. I think it just makes sense, sort of intellectually, if you will, to do that. So I just wanted to be clear about the comparison with the state. That's all. And the next slide is very helpful with that. Thanks for adding that. The other question I wanted to ask was on the cut point slide. If you want to, you had mentioned that part of the reason that we started seeing a bunch of, well, some part of the percentage of kids who were off track in the 11th grade is associated with science, English, and math, and some of it's associated with some of those other things. And I guess what I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you think the science, math, and English or language arts is the critical thing to focus on. And I guess at some level I understand that. However, to the extent that they need to do those other things anyway. If they don't have them or aren't registered for them in 11th grade, are they going to be able to make them all up in 12th grade? That seems
And that's
a
where the
stretch.
variability is,
Yeah.
because you're right, for all of them, absolutely not. But when you go through and you say, oh, this student's, doesn't have the 5 credits in
Yeah.
social studies, could they make it up here? In some cases, it would be very possible for some of those for them to take it
Sure.
their senior year, but not in all cases. So I think that, we're trying to, Dwayne and Kayla and I are working really hard on how can we keep refining the dashboard so that we can have a way of actually, we were talking about recently, how could we even tag those students so it's really clear that, these students could be off track if they're not really careful about what they take their senior year, and these are the ones that we really need to make sure that we've got some significant support.
Well, yeah, and can the tool be sophisticated enough to figure out there aren't enough slots in the 12th grade year to figure out, to fit all these things in and that kind of thing, so.
Yeah.
Can I share a little bit around
Yeah.
that? So I've got some exciting news, because Ginger did ask Kayla and I to do a little bit of work around this, and I just want to
Cool.
share a couple things.
Love to hear it.
Excellent. So as of today, because what's great about the dashboard, everybody, is it is tying into real-time data. The day of looking at the past and wondering what the current is over. So we're looking at real-time data. So we pulled data today that's live today, and it turns out that 14.1% of our seniors, 12th graders, sitting in classes right now, not including charters, 14.1% are off track. So what percentage is on track? Basically 86%. Now what that means is that currently where kids are sitting, 86% of our seniors, if they successfully complete the courses they're sitting in right now, they'll graduate. Now there are some other courses that kids are taking, students are taking, 12th graders, that aren't transcribed into the system because they're doing an online course or they're getting the credit. So that's going to put some upward pressure on that 86%. Then we'll have a few seniors who are going to unfortunately probably not pass at least one class, and that percentage is going to put some downward pressure. But what I'm telling you tonight is, as of right now, we are sitting right at 86% on track, 14 off, and there's these two factors, one pushing up, one pushing down, and the game is still going, so we got to see where it lands, but that's where we sit. The next stage of this piece that we did is asked an interesting question of the data. We said, how many of the kids, of the seniors, the 12th graders who are off track right now, which, by the way, that was exactly 287 kids out of 2,034 seniors. We're talking about 287 kids off track right now by at least one course. So we asked a question, how many of those are in fact off by exactly one course and not multiple, or off in one subject? Let me restate that. And it turned out that a little over a third of all of the 12th graders that are off track are only off track in one subject. By the time you go up to within 3 subjects, you've captured over 50% of the students who are off track. But I'd like to focus on that group that's a third. So then we asked, and this, I'm just giving an example of the very interesting real-time data we now have. And so then we asked, well, of the seniors sitting in class right now, the 287 that are off track, and of that, the subset that's that's a little more than a third of them that are off by exactly one subject, which subject is that? There's some shockers in here. The biggest percentage, 22% of that group, were off in elective credits. Bet you didn't expect that. I didn't. That's an eye-opener, and that's beautiful when data shows us something we wouldn't have guessed. That's pretty cool, in my opinion. It turned out that math and language arts, of course, were in there at 16 and 18% of that group. And then wellness is the next biggest, which was a shocker, at 17% of that group. So,
Let me tag on something with wellness. Yes, and so the other thing about the dashboard is it will not include, so many students well, I wouldn't say many, some students, in order to get that wellness credit, might do like BYU online. And so any of the online opportunities for students to get credit, anything that's not entered into Synergy won't show up until, after they take that class and that gets transferred on. So, it may be that some of those wellness credits are ones that students are taking online, but it doesn't show up in the dashboard. So that's another variability about the dashboard.
we also know by ethnicity, free reduced lunch, all kinds of interesting things, which students we're talking about, what the patterns are, and I think I'll stop now. I just wanted to make the point, we have a data system that didn't exist a year ago. And it's incredible, and we're learning new things with it that we can respond to. So.
Other questions? Oh, okay, Carolyn and then Nate.
Okay, thanks. I was wondering, so we recently, I would say like 5 years ago, we went from 220 credits to 240 credits, right? And so I was wondering if you know how many of our graduates will graduate with just the 240 credits as opposed to more than 240?
Can find out.
We can
but
find
I don't
that out.
know right now.
Okay, so if we have a senior going into his senior year with exactly 240, if he messes up on a class, he's like probably on the core classes that he's required to take, he won't graduate. So we have the 4 English classes, right? So if we don't pass one of those English classes, we've got a dilemma for that kid, right? And you talked about credit recovery. So is that credit recovery online? How is that done? How would a kid who failed an English class get caught up? How would he recover?
It varies. Some classes, they can take it through the online, through Aventa, which is an online program. And in other schools, they actually do it through a program called Blackboard, where it's actually a teacher who will go through and redo that class with them, like in summer school. The other thing about what's interesting about the 4-year graduation rate is officially we don't have to turn in those numbers for the number of students who graduated within a 4-year time period until August 31st. So when we say a student, let's say a student is on track and they fail the last semester of their 4-year English credit, most likely they won't walk on stage, but they could take that credit and possibly make that up in summer school and still count as a 4-year on-time graduate.
Okay, then I'm going to ask you another question about that online recovery. Could a junior decide in the summertime he wants to take his English class during the summer and make sure he gets that, maybe he's struggling in English and he decides he wants to get it out of the way early. Can he take that online class if he wants to?
I can put that question out to high schools to make sure, but when I've asked that question, it really just depends on the number of seats that they have. So first priority, because there's only a certain number of licenses that schools have, especially like for the Aventa program. So if they have a seat that's open after they take care of those students who are behind in credits, then they may offer that opportunity. I would say that isn't probably the norm. Although I think that if a parent, a student, there was a reason behind it and they're really passionate about doing that and they had the room for them to be able to do that, I would think that a principal would, negotiate with parents around that.
Okay, thank you.
Nate.
Maybe you covered this before, but I was wondering, say a 9th grade student gets done with 9th grade and they have 50 credits. At what point is there a face-to-face meeting with the student and their parent about, are they considered off track at that point? And, if they don't have 15 electives or so in that 9th grade year, is there some way to address that earlier, or are we waiting until they're juniors to try to make sure that we cram everything in?
Go ahead if you want to.
Go ahead first.
So, my own experience, my son Caleb is in high school. He's a sophomore. So I know that that personal contact that you're talking about, that's a school by school, counseling department by counseling department. I'm sure there's variance out there in what that looks like and what the triggers are for making that call. I'm pretty confident we have a pretty solid system out there. So I am showing confidence in our system, but I'm saying I don't know that there is a consistent set of triggers. I think that may be changing in the future. I think the kind of data that we have through the dashboard is going to help this system kind of norm what some of these triggers should be for that kind of a guaranteed parent contact around certain places where students fell short. On the other part of the question, I know that once a student is missing some credits, that is taken into account. I'm positive this is true at all of our schools, and they start scheduling the student into those credits immediately. There's not a waiting game until the senior year. So that happens pretty quickly.
Christoph.
Okay, I have 2 questions, and the first one I'll piggyback. And I think you were kind of saying this. It strikes me that just immediately the dashboard could be tracking that you're getting within 240, 180, 120, and I think you're probably doing that, right? Okay. Or you will be, or something.
It is.
The question I wanted to ask was, the very first thing that you said, Dr. Haber, was that our overarching goal is 100% graduation. And I think what we mean when we say that is probably over the course of 7 years or something like that. Is there any way the data that you're starting to present us and the tracking you're doing would start reflecting that? So we might start seeing the representation of what happens to the 14% this year. It sounds like we know many of them are really close. By drawing that out into some of the tables, it might help us focus our attention on just making sure they get over that hump in their 5th year, for example. Yes. And there's just some more reporting I wonder if we could see as we follow on that might help us get the indication that we're leading ourselves over to that larger hurdle.
Absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion, and I've already been talking with principals and counselors about wanting to see what the list is of those students that will be our 5th year seniors for next year, and following up with them, and I'd like to even have some one-on-one conversations with those students to see what they're thinking about as far as motivation and what kind of classes and what they're thinking about for their future, and really ensuring that students that say they're going to go for a 5th year actually enroll and then attend that 5th year, so that we're not losing any students in that transition.
As I listened to you and reflected just those extra 10 seconds, the kind of thing I wonder is as simple as adding a column that says how many students are within 10 credits in one subject, or some, the impetus would be literally the guiding force that gives us to solve that problem, and to show people in the district how simple that might be. By putting that data out there, it's something that I think we're becoming so sophisticated at, it might just help us. Certainly
Yes.
would bring the discussion to the board. So,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can definitely do that. That's a great
Something to
suggestion.
that effect.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to add a couple comments at this point since no one else has their hand up. I guess just to piggyback on a couple things people have said here. I guess first of all, having had a couple of kids just graduate this last May from our system, I think maybe there's an impression that when you say 4 years of English, that means English 1, English 2, English 3, English 4. But I don't really think that's how it's working in high school. I think it's not necessarily a linear progression. In math, you might expect a more linear progression. You have to take this before you take that, before you take that. But I think there are a variety of classes that will fulfill those types of requirements, and sometimes even extracurriculars. Like my kids took speech and debate as a class, and then for some reason, we were really generous because it wasn't like this when I was in school, and they got actually, at least for some of the time, they did speech and debate as an extracurricular. They got extra credit for that too. And they got actual academic credit for it, which I believe fell into the English category. So I think there are things that are not as linear as it might otherwise sound like. And then the other thing that I'm hoping that we do here, because it's part of the whole new district and monitoring report that we did, and instead of couching it as a 100% graduation rate, I think the report talked about a 100% successful completion rate of K to 12. And I think it's an important distinction, because we have students in our system who are going to get a certificate of completion, which is a little bit different than graduation. But I think we just want every kid to fulfill their maximum potential. And in some cases, it's just not going to be a diploma, right? It's going to be something else. And we actually have really incredible programs in this district. I know people who have moved to this district to participate in some of our programs that take care of our kids between ages 18 and 21 who need some extra help learning some of those basic, living skills. And I think we do a fabulous job. But that's one reason I hear graduation rate, and it's like, no, we want every kid to be successfully complete their experience in K-12, no matter what that looks like for them. So those are just my 2 comments. Other things? Susan?
I'm not sure whether it was Dwayne or Ginger who mentioned about the norming of the ways that, or the way in which kids are contacted, or how the professionals meet with them to let them know that they're behind. But I know we are very site-based in how we approach what goes on in our schools, but I think there's times when we need to norm things, when we need some consistency in how things are done. And this is one of those crucial times when every school, I believe, should have a process that every school follows. There's a couple of reasons, and people change schools. And one school may be really good at doing that, and another school may be lax in doing that. And I would hate for a child to not get the same benefit, the same service, because of being at a different school. And I would really urge a norming in that regard.
Other comments, questions? It looks like not. Thank you for a great report and appreciate you answering all of our questions.
Thank you.
Thanks for sticking around tonight. Okay, that brings us to item 7.2, which is the Innovation Schools Act. Who do we have to talk to us about that tonight? We have.
We're going to start out with Legal and Policy Counsel Tom Crabb, who will start the presentation, followed by Assistant Superintendents Nielsen and Lambert. And Haberer.
So back in February, the Board of Education asked for information on the Innovation Schools Act, and at the end of February, board members received a fairly detailed explanation of the Act itself. What we're here to do tonight is to sort of put that detailed information about the Act in context, not only with respect to other laws that may apply to innovation, but also how innovation may be implemented in the district. So to start out, there's a few things just for background information that I wanted to point out. The first one is that the Innovation Schools Act is only one way that innovation can be implemented in district schools. It's certainly not the only way. Just one example, which is included in the board's packets, is District Policy FF, which since 2009 has basically had a innovation component to it, which is a brand promise that schools can make describing the educational philosophy, methodology, and or curriculum that's being implemented at the school. And there's actually criteria that the schools have to demonstrate to the board to get approved to have that brand promise in their name, and they also have to have implemented that curriculum, philosophy, or methodology at their school. They have to show community support and whatnot. A couple examples of that are the Olander School for Project-Based Learning, and then tonight there's an application for the Lopez Elementary A Leader in Me school those are two different types of innovations that can be done. But I guess I want to emphasize that there's a lot of innovation that's going on in this district without the fanfare. The board and central administration are free to implement any innovation they want without the Innovation Schools Act, without Policy FF. That is basically what the Board of Education and the administration is statutorily designated to do, is to determine the curriculum and the educational programs that will be implemented in the district schools. So what I want to do is sort of start at the end of the process. Now I'm going to talk about the Act, give a quick overview, and then give the board a chance to ask any questions, not only of me if they're technical questions, but more importantly, the assistant superintendents may be able to answer questions about what's actually happening or what may be contemplated in the district in terms of innovation. But there's two types of, or two ways that innovation can be implemented under the Innovation Schools Act. One of them is to institute a plan for an innovation school, just one school, and the other one is to bring forth a plan for an innovation school zone, which is a group of schools that are connected in some way, either geographically, either that's the feeder schools that are all part of and feeding into a high school, or that may have similar educational philosophies or whatnot. So they can be joined in any logical way, and so you could have multiple schools that are designated under this act. And as it points out in this slide here, there's really three things starting at the end of the process that Poudre School District can get under this act. And the way they get these things is applied to the State Board of Education. One thing that they can get is designation as a district of innovation. I guess it's just an honor. I don't know if there's gold stars and certificates or anything that come with that, but you are designated as a district of innovation if the State Board approves that, but it is an application process, and as you may remember from the description of the statute, the State Board can make suggestions for changing that, so it's not something that the district necessarily has complete control over. The second thing that being designated as a district of innovation allows is waiver of certain statutes and regulations, and the statutes are ones under Title 22, which are school laws, with certain exceptions. That's not such a big deal because under state law, the district can get waivers of those exact same statutes without going through this process. So if the district wants to work to implement innovations in another way besides using this act, they can get waivers of statutes and they can get waivers of the same statutes. There's a 6-page regulation that describes how to go about that. And in fact, a bill just this term, House Bill 1271, proposes to revise the waiver process for the Innovation Schools Act to make it the same as what applies to the school district if they're just separately going for waivers outside the act. And that change basically boils down to the way it is under the Innovation Schools Act now is the waiver stays in place as long as the district's designation as a district of innovation remains. What the bill proposes is that just like with alternative district waiver, that waiver can be revoked under the same circumstances as it would be for the Board of Education. So it's really not a new thing. The third thing that the district can get, as pointed out here, is waiver of provisions in the district's employee agreement. If there's something in the employee agreement that, if it remains in place, won't allow the district to implement the innovation, then that can be waived. but it can only be done if by secret ballot 60% of all the different collective bargaining groups at the affected schools approve it. That's something else that through the collective bargaining process the district could separately address without going through the Innovation Schools Act. So that's the end of the process. Before we get there, before the district submits something to the state board requesting to be a district of innovation if they want, the Board of Education has to make some decisions. And the first one is that the board can act on plans that are submitted by schools within the district. And that those plans submitted by the schools have to be considered and acted on within 60 days after receiving them. And those can be plans, again, for an innovation school, a single school, or 2 or more schools to be an innovation school zone. As pointed out in the second bullet here, the board itself can initiate the creation of innovation either for a single school or for a zone, but it has to do it in collaboration with the schools. Under this act, the board can't just impose it. Now that's something that the board and the central administration can do. In fact, the board has constitutional authority to do this. Outside of this act, the board can decide this is the education, this is the curriculum we want to have in our schools, and just impose that. But under the act, if you want to have an innovation school or an innovation school zone, you have to work in collaboration with the schools to do that. And finally, if the board wants to, it could create a plan for an innovation school zone that includes every school in the district. So I guess the entire district then is innovative. That's specifically contemplated under the act. So what's included within innovation school plans for individual schools? There's 10 components that the statute says need to be included, and I think that they're relatively self-explanatory. The first 5 are up here, and these are the types of things that I think that the district is already doing with many of the educational programs and curricular options that they're considering, so there's really not too much to say about these. With respect to the second 5 contents of the innovation plans that are specified under the Act, I think the first 2 bullets are worth emphasizing, and that is as part of any application for an innovation school, that has to include evidence that a majority of the school's administrators, teachers, and the School Accountability Committee consent to the designation as an innovation school. An application can't be submitted unless a majority of each of those 3 groups consent to that. And the second bullet points out it doesn't have any particular requirement for how much support has to be shown, but the application has to at least set out the level of support amongst other groups for designation as an innovation school, and those other groups are other employees that are not administrators or teachers, students, parents, and the community as a whole. So those 10 things are the required components of an application for an innovation school. And then finally, plans for innovation school zones, again, that includes more than one school, have to have these 5 components. The first component is everything that we just looked at for an individual innovation school, and then the remaining 4 bullets, and you'll notice that the last 2 correspond to the 2 that I pointed out for innovation schools, which is evidence that a majority of each school in the zones, administrators, teachers, and School Accountability Committee members consent to the creation of the innovation school zone, and then pointing out or describing the level of support amongst other employees, students, parents, and the community for each school. So that, I do not have a slide that says questions, but I know since this is my last slide that this is my time to ask for questions. So if you have any questions for me, or more importantly, the assistant superintendents, we're ready for them.
Okay. Nate, and then Carolyn, and then Christoph, and then Rob, and then Susan, and then David. Do you guys get that order? Okay.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering how close are we to a plan to create a innovation school zone? And why would we want to?
In terms of how close we are, I'm not aware of any plans in place for innovation schools or innovation school zones, but someone here might know something I don't.
Right now, there are no plans.
We actually think our ends in our planning for the future is quite able to accommodate any innovation, and we don't think that making a zone is going to change it. In many ways, as you heard, it may restrict our ability your ability particularly, to be in charge of what happens.
Sorry, Carolyn.
All right, thank you. So in the state, I was looking on their website today, and I noticed there, I think, like 67 innovation schools across the state. Does that sound about right, about 67 or so? I think there's about 67, but I noticed that 40 of them were in Denver Public School System. And so I wondered why the Denver Public School had so many schools of innovation. And so the School of Innovation, or this act, has a director. There's somebody who down at the CDE who directs this, and so I called her and I asked her why DPS had so many innovation schools, and she told me that the reason a lot of people choose to use schools of or the Innovation Act for schools and existing schools is because they might have a school that's failing or not doing well, and they want to get waivers so that they can try something different. Like a school that might be in turnaround. So she was saying that the most of the times that she sees the act being used is for schools that are like in turnaround and need waivers and want to try something different, and with the support, of course, of the school and the parents. And she said that it's also, like you said, quite a process. It's at least 60 days to start and then 60 days for them to have it. So it's a really big process. And she says it's really not intended for existing schools that are really doing well. And she said, just like you also commented, that there are better ways for successful schools who want waivers to get them, that there's actually statute for schools that are doing well but want a waiver to get them. So it seems like to me that this would be a program that might be more appropriate for a school in turnaround, and if we were talking about an existing school.
With all due respect to the State Board of Education, or I'm sorry, CDE, as State Board is the one that would actually approve this, regardless of whether Denver Public Schools or any other district is using it primarily for schools that are struggling or in turnaround, I don't think that it makes a whole lot of sense to do that, because basically this Innovation Schools Act, the big difference between what this act does and what the district can do on its own anyway is that it takes away flexibility and authority of the Board of Education and the central administration to implement innovation when and as it wants to with respect to turnaround schools, and it basically turns over a lot of that decision-making authority pursuant to the plan over to the school. And to my mind, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, it could, but we would think, or I would think, that what we really want is to work in partnership between the Board of Education and the administration, bringing to bear all the resources in a collaborative way rather than having a school sort of put in place a plan which, once it's approved, has to be kept in place and can't be changed unless you go back to either the state board or the Board of Education. Yes, it's an alternative to do it, but I think another thing to keep in mind about this is the big difference between just implementing innovation in the normal course of what the board and the central administration and even the administration at the schools normally do, is that this act takes away a lot of the control and authority that the board and central administration would have.
And I think that was kind of my point, that it probably isn't a good fit for schools that, in our district, that are doing well.
I don't think it's a good fit for schools that are not doing well, as also is what was the point I was trying to make, because I think that taking them, essentially having them operate pursuant to a plan without the flexibility and the ability to bring additional resources to bear and make changes sort of on the fly as needed, to some extent you take that away if you have a plan in place that you have to operate under pursuant to this act.
So let's say that we wanted to open up a high school, a 9 through 12 high school that was modeled on students getting an associate's degree instead of, or in conjunction with their diploma, getting an associate's degree. Would an innovation school, would that be an innovation school, or can we create a school like that within the confines of what we have?
It depends how you define innovation, but I'm hearing that that's something we do now. Scott may want to speak to that.
We believe we could do that right now. I mean, so we could move in that direction without moving with the Innovations Act. We could make those innovations and are looking at making those innovations inside of current high schools, as well as looking at what we do with our own new high schools and how we create that. We have a palette from which to move and create innovation in our own system, that when we think about DPS, they're more structured inside of the way their whole system's set up. In PSD, we have, Tom talked about in his presentation, some of the already innovations in place, that the way we're structured and the way we have already some site-based decision-making in this district, we already have the aptitude to do some of that work. And we believe as a group of three and Dr. Smicer that listening, that we can move in the innovative ways our principals and buildings are looking to do some innovation as we speak.
Have any of our schools ever asked for waivers, not under the Innovations Act, but just under the law? Has any of our schools ever asked, or have we ever asked for waivers?
That hasn't happened since I've been here, but it is true that, and that's a good point, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to go under the Innovation Schools Act to ask for waivers from the state board. Either the district can do it, or an individual school can ask the Board of Education, and if it sort of makes a good case for it, then the request does need to come from the board. But you know, to some extent, I think that also might be an overblown aid to innovation and to improving school operations. There's a lot of flexibility that the law allows the district to operate in as things are, but I think maybe one of the reasons that we aren't getting those requests is that people aren't feeling so constrained by the law that they can't operate as it is. But it is an option that's available and has been for years and years and years.
I believe Christoph is next.
All right. So I'm thinking very broadly tonight, and I want to be careful to express it that way. And in preparing questions prior to the meeting, I wanted to make sure that I was trying to express the broad perspective. And it's not specific to the innovation schools or anything like that. It was trying to imagine the movements that are going on in our community. And the best I could say it is I am aware of a lot of communities, so that's students, parents, and teachers who are putting a ton of energy. Either they're sending students to charter schools, or they're motivated enough to go work on charter schools. And the barrier to entry to a charter school is huge. But they're after something, and it's got to be innovation. It's something, and I'll add, a lot of these are very publicly minded people. Some of the people I know can't believe themselves that they're working on a charter school. So I want to be really explicit about where I'm going with this. So what exactly are the barriers internally to innovation that are so large that we are losing students, parents, and teachers to charter schools? And what could we do internally to motivate those same people to innovate within the purview of our district? Because I think what we have as a district is just absolutely fantastic. We have so much in place, and yet they're willing to leave that. So I think that's the question I'd like to put on the table, and we can discuss it tonight, or we can let it sit and ruminate on it. I just don't want to leave tonight not having posed that question.
I think that that's a good question, and I think that the people up here and Dr. Smyser are probably the best ones to answer it. But I think that the underlying premise of your question may not be correct. And so what I would suggest, before anyone else steps up and offers their own comments, is that I'm not convinced that the thing being sought by people who are working to either create a charter school or people who want to go to charter schools, that the one thing that they're looking for is innovation that they're being barred from implementing within the district. Rather, I think what a big part of what they're looking for is independence from the district, and they don't want to be constrained by many of the district operating oversight and rules. Now, that, I can't speak
Tom,
for
I'm just gonna say, fine. That's a question we should ask.
Right.
And it's one I think that this board should listen to. Some of us are listening and asking those questions. It's just really important that we think about it. And to me, the fact that we have 7% of our community in charters, and we're going to be presented with more people leaving to charters, is something we have to be willing to deal with up front. And to the extent that we have the greatest resources, again, when I think of what it takes to put together a charter school, it's huge. You can't even do it with a building. You can't pay teachers correctly. There are a lot of barriers, and people are still willing. So whether it's independence or innovation or something, I think it's something we need to be willing to ask ourselves. And again, you may not have great answers tonight. I just wanted to make sure. I didn't want to leave this discussion without asking that question.
Christoph, I appreciate the question. I think it is one for us to dive into. And when you see groups of students who are leaving for whatever reason, it's important that we as a board and we as district leadership and building leadership listen to what's happening. Our constituents are telling us something. They're saying they're seeking something, potentially. So we need to listen, understand that, and I think we're in the process of trying to do that right now as particularly the secondary group is trying to understand and trying to shift practices to meet the needs of some that we aren't. But I think the other thing that's important is we look at how nimble a charter can be once it gets going, or even in the marketing on the front side. It's easy for them to say something. And how do we as a district continue to talk about the great things you said? We have fantastic things going on in the district. And how do we make sure all of our constituents know what those great things are and what they look like at the different sites around the district? Because not only do we have great things, but we have great choice, lots of different choices to meet those individual needs that I think we can continue to do a better job of letting people know what those options are. But as we do that, I think it is important that we listen, and we listen and try to figure out what they're telling us as they potentially look for a different option.
I'm really sorry. I'm gonna allow myself to react a little bit as I hear things, so just bear with me. In the questions I sent out, I was trying to give a very particular example of what happens when a group of students, parents, and teachers, not necessarily from the same school, start looking to make a charter school. So they're looking for something. You may call it independence, you may call it innovation, you might call it choice, and they don't find it within our schools. But they put enough work in place, and I think that's actually valuable. They put enough work in place to launch a charter school. Where is it within our community of schools that we have the boundaries for them to do that same work? Right? That's kind of one of the questions I'm asking. What if they wanted to do that? And where would they go? You know, the only option I think many of them feel today is they leave and they start charter schools, and then, you know, maybe they do a fantastic job like some of our charters do, but they might actually do a better job within the purview of the district if we could solve that problem. So I'm sorry, just allow myself to react, and then I'll quiet down from here.
I'd like to respond to that last part, if it's okay. One of the nice things that I get to do in my work, in addition to the elementary, is to be the charter school liaison. So over the last 3 to 5 years, along with Lauren Hooten and Tom as well, we've had a lot of conversations with prospective charters, those that have seen it through and received their charter, those that didn't. And I can tell you, I want to back up a little bit of what Tom said. They're not always looking to break free. I'll give you an example. We have a lot of parents who were very happy that now are at 2 of our charters I can speak of, Mountain Sage and Fort Collins Montessori. They were different, unique, specialized approaches that they felt strongly about. Many of those parents were extremely happy in PSD. They didn't leave on bad terms. They simply wanted that option for their students. And one of the nice things that we have, and a benefit we have here, is when a group of people have that motivation, they have a unique perspective, we can welcome them into our family and be a PSD charter and provide yet another choice or another option for our families. And it's been my experience over the last, really the last 3 to 4 years in particular, everybody comes with a variety of motivations. Some want to, like Tom said, they want to get away from the oversight and the rules possibly. There are others that simply want to forge ahead with a different type of option for themselves and for future kids. And I think about the last 2 schools we chartered, Montessori and Mountain Sage, are good examples of that, with parents in general happy with the experience and simply wanted to explore something else and try it.
I think we had Rob, and then Susan, and then David.
All right, so I want to follow up a little bit on what Christoph was talking about, and frankly, what you said, Todd, is a great lead-in. So I think that, you know, we use the word innovation, and, you know, we have different things in our minds about what innovation is. And the distinction between innovation and independence and choice, certainly as it relates to the content and sort of some of the processes rather than the philosophical, we don't want oversight kind of stuff, I'm not sure that that's a distinction that's meaningful. It's really, so to take it to specifics, which I think is helpful in something like this, you know, you pointed out that the Montessori folks in particular are interested, or, you know, in general were happy with what was going on, but they wanted a different approach to the education. And it's not an unknown approach or a radical approach, or, I mean, it's different, but it's not, I'll leave it, it's not unknown, right? It's a known thing, it has some research behind it, et cetera, et cetera. So why would we not be willing within the district to say, yeah, we have core schools, we have IB schools, why can't we have a Montessori school? Why does it require folks who are happy within the district to go make a charter school for something like that? I mean, that's the kind of question, I think, that's the sort of rubber meets the road stuff. And frankly, we have every reason to believe that we're going to have another, and it's a different situation, I understand, but another example, we have every reason to believe we're going to have a charter application coming later in the year. Why were those folks not able to work within the district to accomplish the kind of school that they're talking about making. And we don't need to debate the points of the individual things unless you think, and it's up to you how you want to respond. But I think it's important to recognize that there are specifics behind the generalities here, and it helps to think about them that way, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Rob, let me take your first example. I think the folks that started Mountain Sage, when I think of Liv Helmrichs and John Sanderson that started Fort Collins Montessori, I would say that they probably say that they worked within the system. They actually had an opportunity to make all of the curriculum focused, whether it's Waldorf inspired or whether it's Montessori, which are both unique approaches, not new, but unique approaches. We also don't want to have our schools be, have so many approaches that we can't land on one thing, right? I mean, our focus is that we zero in on the standards. We look for innovation. We look for good pedagogy, all those things that are there. Just because a school may not take on some of the core principles of Montessori or Mountain Sage or whatever may be available, are Waldorf inspired, doesn't mean that they're not moving forward or they're finding success. And I think those families would say, at least the ones that I know, I think they would say the system worked very well. There was an opportunity to put emphasis, much like our schools that opt to be International Baccalaureate or core knowledge. I don't think it's an issue that they had to go be a charter. I think that was just an option for them to get that emphasis and that focus. Again, I think when we think about our schools, we want good sound instruction. We want good sound curriculum and all those things that are there. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
No, and I guess I did not mean to imply in any way that they're mutually exclusive. And in fact, I guess the question really is, and I don't know the history here, but again, taking the Montessori thing as an example, if the Montessori folks had ever actually come to the district to say, geez, we'd like to open a Montessori school within the district and have all the high quality of instruction stuff that you're talking about, it's not clear that they felt like they could. I mean, again, it's sort of awkward to be talking about a specific school this way, but I think it's also instructive because I think the question is, and I guess somehow I don't feel like I'm getting it across, is why would we want as a district to have a charter school open to take Montessori or Waldorf or whatever the next thing is going to be, right? If we could accommodate in a high quality way that kind of instructional approach within the school district. I mean, what's the benefit to us to have that happen? And if there isn't so much benefit, why would we not want to, what's preventing folks from allowing that to happen within as a district school? Am I?
Yeah, no, that's
repeating these. That's good.
So I'm sorry.
The direct answer to your question is that there's nothing that, at least legally, that prevents the district, or policy-wise, that prevents the district from implementing for example, a Montessori school itself rather than as a charter. And in fact, I can't recall for sure if it was the Montessori school, but I think it might have been, that the prior board, when it was considering the application, did consider that to some extent. Now, I do know that there have been times when that question has been posed to charter applicants, and they've indicated that sort of thanks but no thanks, we want to sort of run our own school. But that doesn't mean that the Board of Education cannot and should not, if they are given a charter application, exploring, if that's what the board wants to do, exploring that alternative within the district. Now, in addition to the fact that there's no legal or policy impediments to doing that, I think that there is sort of a very real practical concerns that have to be addressed, not the least of which is facilities. And, you know, there's a cost associated with that, but can it be done? Yes. And I don't know that it's been something that prior boards, until perhaps the one that was considering the Montessori school, have been interested in entertaining. This is a new board.
Yeah.
And if that's a direction and a view that this new board wants to look at, there's no reason why you couldn't do it. But you would have to wrestle with the same things that the charter applicants wrestle with, which is
Space.
facilities
Yeah,
and
yeah.
space
Yeah.
and staff and whatnot.
Yeah, and I guess my own.
And Rob, I think Dr. Spicer wants to get in.
If I could just interject one comment too, don't underestimate the desire. You can say that, whatever.
Go ahead.
Oh, don't underestimate the desire for independence. I know that you said that didn't carry a lot of weight with you, but there's a big difference. If I am a community member or a parent and I have a group of people who want to educate in a certain way, but the district is saying, no, that's okay, we're going to do that, and we're going to designate a hallway in some building, and you can do it there, but guess what? The principal's going to be in charge, and you're not going to be in charge. And this matters to people, and it matters a lot,
Yes.
who's running the program. And that is a large part of the desire for charters is, I get to do it my way, not the district's way. And those are dividing factors for many people.
No, I understand that, I mean, I accept that, but I also think some of that drive for independence, if you want to look at it that way, may arise from trust issues, historical trust issues in terms of whether well, I understand, but it also has, I think at some level, it depends on how open we are to I don't know, waivers, understandings about how the school is going to run, that kind of stuff. You know, and I'm not saying you know very well that I feel pretty strongly about some things being school district things rather than district of school kind of things. So I understand that there's a tension in what I'm saying here, but I think we need to be open to those conversations, and while I accept what you said, Tom, about the board can do this, that, or the other thing, by the time it gets to the board, the sort of die is pretty cast, I think. I mean, people have already spent a lot of time sorting out how to make themselves a charter school, and so it's not surprising.
Can I just interject something?
Yeah.
So 2 years before the Montessori came to us, I think, so a couple of friends of mine came to me and said, hey, we're looking at doing a charter school. Usually, I mean, well, there's cases where you don't hear about it. There's current ones, just sort of rumblings. Nobody's even talked to us, right? But the current one, though, 2 years ago, before it opened, before they came to us with a proposal, they said, hey, we're thinking about starting it. I said, really? Do you want to do that? Because that's a lot of work, and it's not only a lot of work, but there's a lot of hurdles. You have to find facilities. I mean, it can be a really hard thing. Have you considered, going into one of our, at the time we had some elementary schools that were not full up. And I said, have you
Sure.
considered going and talking to them? They might welcome a program into their building to help fill it up, and then you guys could get your program and you wouldn't have to leap over these really high hurdles. I don't know how much of that they pursued or not, but I don't think it's for lack of them being aware that they can do it. Right?
Well, I guess-
I just want to say that because it's not like people weren't advised that there were options. That's all I want to
Okay,
say.
I accept that, and I wasn't obviously involved in all the conversations, but I have talked to some people at the Montessori Montessori school in administration, and there's some sense that I have that they'd be willing to join the district if we could figure out a way to make it happen. So I don't know what's preventing those conversations or whether I'm misinterpreting those conversations. I don't represent the district in conversations like that, but I hear that kind of thing. So really, we don't need to spend forever debating the Montessori school issue. I just think it's important that we consider whether we can be open to other ideas in terms of programmatic ideas, or even in terms of the way we run schools within reason, right? Adhering to high standards and whatnot, so that we can have folks working more closely within the system to enjoy the benefits of the system, and frankly, to avoid some of the bad blood may be a little strong, but certainly some of the tension, let's call it that has and continues to exist with some of our charter schools. I think we're better. Yeah. So I guess that's what I wanted to say about that.
Well, there's lots of people who want to ask more questions.
I
So,
understand. That's
Susan
why
and David haven't got a chance yet, and then Nate's had his hand up, so we're going to go Susan, and then David, and then Nate, and I see Christoph has his hand up again. Is that fair? Oh, okay. Susan.
Statement. Don't know how to approach it any differently than Christoph and Rob have, because I feel, I feel the same urgency to address the needs of this, our own PSD staff who are in the works to create this school. And the words that come to mind are frustration, disappointment, feeling that their ideas are being thwarted for whatever reason. And it is what it is, and it's out there, and I don't quite know, what to do about it, but I look to you guys to know maybe how to reach those folks. You might even know who they are, who are looking for perhaps a reason to stay, or perhaps not. As was said earlier, perhaps they just want the independence and want to do it their way, and if that's the case, then there's no stopping. But if it's because they're not finding what they need within our district, then we have to deal with that discontent. And I'm feeling it, I hear it, and it's frustrating to me because I know we're in an amazing district, but there are unhappy people who perhaps will leave. And my understanding with our charter schools is that we charter schools to do things that we're not doing. And so that's why they have the charter school. But if we're doing it, then I don't see a reason for a charter school to be, have a contract in our district. So maybe somebody could address that.
Well, I think Susan has a valid question that should be answered, yeah. I mean, why is it, if these are supposed to be charter schools that develop new ways of doing things, why should we consider a charter school that just wants to do stuff we're already doing? I think it's a valid question.
Well, that's, I think, a little bit different. There's maybe two questions there, and I think Ginger's been wanting to answer the other one, but the Charter Schools Act has been revised to move away from an emphasis on innovation, and instead it talks about demonstrated effective educational methods. Core knowledge is a good example of that. So it really isn't accurate anymore that the purpose of the Charter School Act, or that the way the Charter School Act works for everyone, is just to allow schools to implement something that isn't being done in the district. So I just wanted to say that, and the law was changed to sort of emphasize that. But in terms of the other point, I think that, again, Ginger wanted to speak to that.
Well, this isn't a direct answer to a question, but I think it lays a context for a specific example, is I think what I heard Rob ask for. What's a specific example of what we're doing? And when you think about innovation, an important aspect of that is, for example, personalized learning. And that is something that, we've heard from parents and teachers, that how can we look at personalizing the learning for students? And it's an important part of the board ends as well. And so currently, what we're doing right now is we have a partnership with through a grant, through iLearn Collaborative, and we just got done surveying about 700 parents. We've surveyed teachers, administrators, students, in their thoughts around blended learning. And blended learning is just one example of how you can personalize learning. And so that's just an example of how, we listen to what our system is asking for and what our parents are asking for. And we are right now gathering what people's thoughts are, and we are meeting actually on Friday to look at what some of those survey results are so that we can start looking at, both Scott and Todd have brought up that topic with principals. And Kim McMonigal and myself and Robert Beauchamp are working together to see how could we infuse blended learning as an example within our schools so that we can personalize that learning. So that's just an example of one of many possibilities that could help transform our schools and cause them to be more innovative. And when I think of innovative, I think of that personalized learning. So that's just an example to put on the table in response to some of those questions that you had asked.
Up to that, then, and that's why I say I know that we're doing amazing things all the time. There's like day after day. I realize your work is incredible. How do we deal with the perception that we're not doing enough? And I think that's my frustration. It's the perception, you know, and I don't know. I don't know what to do about that.
I think people need to read Dwayne Schmitz's excellent monitoring report on our district ends to understand what really a great district we have. So if anybody has questions, we're happy to answer them. We will be at the the Old Town Library on Saturday from 10 to 11:30. Come talk to us. We'd love to talk to you about that. David.
I started with a question about a half hour ago, and as things have gone forward, my question keeps changing. But I think this has been a tremendous discussion, and I think it has raised a lot of very important issues. But I think we might be, what would be the word, blinkered a bit here. We're in education. We have a certain set of assumptions about the value of it and how to do it. And we don't get in any of our discussions people who are really coming from a really different way. We have to realize that a charter school is an umbrella concept. It's not a single thing. It's not, one thing done by all these different people. It's a vehicle which people use for all sorts of different reasons. And for that reason, I think we have to broaden our perspective a bit to the sorts of things that people might be attracted to. And I can go back to when I was on the Council of the American Historical Association, and that's a lot of years ago. And there was a lot of discussion about what should be in a curriculum, and I don't know that it was quite the same thing as what's now called core knowledge, but there was a belief that the best knowledge in the world was European knowledge. It was Eurocentric curriculum, and it had no interest in the rest of the world. And I think the attraction to being in a Eurocentric kind of superior way of education was what attracted some people to that sort of approach. I remember, national debates, and I followed them, and I was in some of them. And I think we have to broaden our understanding as to why people want charters, because I think there is a whole range of possibilities. And I think ultimately we may not fully grasp, as long as we think that charters simply want to do things that we're doing better than we're doing, or they simply want independence, whatever. I think there's ways in which they feel what they're doing is actually very distinct from and very different from anything we're doing. And I don't know how to get that into looking into what's going on and all of that. But there's charters is a kind of a maybe it's a freight train filled with all sorts of cars, and each car has something different in it, and they're all going to different destinations when they get to the end of the run. And we have to understand charters, I think, from that broader angle to see what's going on.
Nate.
Yes, my comment is basically follows on Susan's question about how do we deal with the perception that we're not doing enough, and also to Ginger's comment about trying different kinds of innovative things like a focus on personalized learning. I think that as a district, we can do lots of backflips and try to stretch and innovate as much as we want, but there are practical limitations like Tom was talking about. And as a board member, I want the district to be successful, and if there are people that want to be independent or for whatever reason want a different type of education for their children and other students, I hope that we can have charter schools that are successful in the district. So I don't think it's an either or. It'd be great if we could do everything and provide every interest that everyone has, but there are practical limitations. So when we reach those limits, I think we want to create a system and encourage a system where the people that put all the effort into creating and operating a charter school are as successful as the schools in Poudre School District. And there are lots of tensions and competing interests, but that's the way it is. So we just deal with it and address them as they come.
And Christoph. And then Rob.
Okay, so it did give me time to think. So that's good. Ruminate, yes.
Love that word.
This topic on the agenda started as a informational topic, and clearly we've wandered, but what I definitely did want to have happen is what I think is happening, is that really this is a discussion about board values. That's what I think we're doing, and I think that's what we want to be doing. Whether we all agree on those values or not, that's what I think we're doing tonight. And I would ask all of us to be cautious, not to look too deeply at what we are doing, but to stop and think about where we want to go and what this board and what this group of people, the staff included, is all about. And I think it has to be something we all come together on. Honestly, and Nate, I'm glad you said this, I actually do imagine a district where we have charter schools and that we work collaboratively together. We know that charters came out of a sense of antagonism over the last 30 years. It's not where we need to be in the future, and I really appreciate that, Dr. Lambert. I think that's absolutely correct. I think we want to be able to work together. But I also imagine a district down the road where people who are really creative, have great ideas, are full of energy, as we're currently see happening, have an opportunity to create within the boundaries of our district. I actually feel like I've heard 2 times, because I was involved in the Montessori and again this time, that there are opportunities for these people to work within our boundaries and within the confines of the district with a great deal of independence, which apparently we can give them, but also work within the district in ways that means that they would be able to capture more students that want that same curriculum. You know, I actually imagine if Ridgeview had started today in a board and a staff that was conducive to it, maybe it would be a district school. And they would capture a lot of students that want that education more than they do today. And we'd be thrilled with it. And I realize that there are a lot of difficulties. And in the email I sent, you know, I'd mentioned there are possibilities for schools within schools. I know the IB program runs within a school with its own director, you know, so there must be ways we could achieve those things if we wanted to, and I'm not saying we do. I think that the amount of effort and time that people put into charter schools, I mean, we're talking a couple years at a minimum, gives us time to reflect and think about how to fit these people within school buildings, should we want them to be. I think in the end, what some of us on the board, or all of us, are starting to express is we hear from our community that we just want, the community wants to be heard. We just want a listening session at this point. You know, we want the opportunity for people to get to think about what they want and express it, and hopefully just all of us acting openly to see where we go. I have no idea where it ends up. So it's just a question for tonight.
Saturday morning, Old Town Library, 10 to 11:30. Join us, talk to us. Okay. Rob.
Yeah, so I guess that a couple of things come to mind. One of them is I like a lot what you said, Christoph. Thanks for doing that summary and some of that vision description. You referenced people full of energy. I think sometimes the people who drive the charters are community members and parents and whatnot. And so to the extent that we have mechanisms within the district for staff members to generate new ideas and new ways of approaching things, that's good. And I assume all the folks up here are all receptive to that kind of discussion and help to support within the context of the district what makes sense. I'm not sure what the mechanism would be for community members to, say, hey, we think XYZ program is important, how can we get the attention of the district to at least talk about it, Maybe that's just contact one of you folks. I don't know, but I think we need to be broad about this, who these people who are full of energy, who are perhaps we want to harness their ideas and consider whether it makes sense to do the work within the district or in a charter context. I think we need to be perceived both within the district by district staff and externally as being open to having conversations. That doesn't mean we agree with everything that's brought to us, but being perceived as being open to those kind of conversations. And then at some level addressing the question that Nate raised, how far we need to think about, maybe generally and certainly within the context of any ideas that are brought forward, how far outside the box of our traditional thinking are we prepared to go? What's the cost-benefit trade-off associated with whatever is being brought forward? And that being outside the box might be programmatically, in terms of a program that we haven't had before, or administratively, in terms of how would more independence, if that's what is being considered or concerned about, how could that fit in? Or not? Like I say, I'm not saying we should accept every idea about how a school should be run or what curriculum it should use or anything else. But to the extent that we're open to those conversations, we might have more opportunity both to support more things within the context of the district, but also to have good, better relations, more cooperative relations, if in fact the decision is made that a charter or some other vehicle is more appropriate for whatever this group of people, this idea is that might be being considered. So, yeah. Thanks for listening.
Susan.
I think one of the things that makes it difficult for public schools to do some of the things that charter schools can do. I would wrote down some words here because it's usually a better way for me to think about it. But I look at what the public schools do as working within the constraints and confines of policies and regulations. Charter schools oftentimes are not burdened with that. I use the word shackled. I believe that public schools are shackled to policies and regulations. We don't have that freedom to experience waivers from standardized testing. If we did have those waivers, we could explore other innovative ways of accomplishing what we want to do for kids. But unfortunately, we're shackled. And so, perhaps that's creating a frustration for parents, seeing that because of that, we can't be as innovative as we'd like to be. And perhaps they would like to be released from that and enjoy those waivers and be able to do the things that we wish we could do if we weren't tied to all of these things. We, as a public school, we vow, it's our policy, we promise to educate every child every day, and we educate every child who comes through our door. Charter schools don't necessarily have to make that promise. And so perhaps it puts us at it as a disadvantage, but, you know, as I have always said, it is what it is. But until we have an equal playing field for the charter schools and the public schools, you know, there's always going to be that discontent, and I think the public schools are always going to be in those shackles.
Carolyn.
I just have one last comment to make. I was reading here about that obtaining an innovation status can give schools more autonomy, similar to those received by charter schools, giving them greater flexibility and control over their resources. And I think that goes to what you're saying, Susan, that we should be able to have our district schools act like charter schools, be able to have that flexibility from some of the rules and regulations that maybe some of the district schools have to go by. And I think that we have people inside the district who are interested in that flexibility. And I guess the question here is the district open to that? Are we open to having schools that are autonomous and independent? Is that threatening to us if losing control, or is that something that we can nurture and grow and make it work inside of our district?
Susan.
And I would respond, I like that idea. The thing is, I'd like to get rid of the perception that people are fleeing the public schools to go to charter schools. If we could create that idea of choice for different reasons other than I'm fleeing, that perception is just not a good one.
Yeah,
Rob?
Yeah, I get, as somebody else pointed out, I think there are a whole lot of reasons that people go to charter schools. I think a lot of them, it's because they feel strongly about the kind of program that's being offered, rather than, I mean, there are some people who are, I suppose, want to leave the public schools for whatever reason, but I think there's also programmatic reasons that draw them to the schools, and it's those programmatic things that I think we need to investigate how to deal with at some level. So I understand the point, but I think it's a range of motivations.
Well, just keep in mind that no matter where you go to school and what the programming, the most important things, in my experience, are the leadership at the school and the leadership in the district, because that's where you're going to get. And let's keep in mind that public schools, that charter schools are public schools as well. They just have a different form of governance and for some parts of it, funding. Okay, are we worn this topic out? Okay. Nate, okay.
Not yet.
Not
I would disagree with you, Madam President. I think the most important thing is, for example, the custodians, because they know everything.
No, you are right. My mistake.
I'm not sure if in a district that values licensed educators as much as we do, that we would consider the custodians leaders of the school or the district.
I think there are a lot of different types of leaders in the school, but it's the climate and culture that you establish within each school and within the district. I would like to point out, just in terms of time, that we do have a couple of staff members here for our next two items, so I'm going to make us get through those before I call a break. So you guys can keep on talking as long as you want, but I know that staff members who are here just for these next two items would like to get out of here eventually. So
Yeah.
Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the question I have is what happens next with this, if anything? I mean, we asked for this topic to be added to the agenda. We've added it to the agenda. We've had quite a wide-ranging conversation about it. Is that it? What, if anything, happens next?
Christoph.
It almost sounded like a retreat agenda item in my mind, something where we could, I mean, it seems like tonight might have been better served as a work session. And I apologize for my small part in that, but you know, maybe it's something we would consider for a retreat at some point. I don't
We
think
can add it
anything
to the June
happens.
retreat agenda.
There you go.
We might eventually have to make that start at, you know, a lot earlier to get through it, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, anything else on this topic before June? Awesome. So without further ado, let us continue on to item, the 8.0 action items. And we have 8.1, resolution in support of National Volunteer Appreciation Week. So I believe we have a motion.
Yes, and in the interest of time, I'm going to read this really fast. I move the following resolution of the Poudre School District Board of Education in support of National Volunteer Appreciation Week. Whereas our pool of more than 22,000 volunteers made up of parents, community members, college students, former teachers, business leaders, employees, members of civic organizations, and senior citizens, and there are probably more than just those categories, annually donate more than 72,000 hours of volunteer time in our schools, which includes tutoring, mentoring, assisting in the classrooms, and behind the scenes throughout the day, school day, and during after-school programs. And whereas the current industry standard of $23.56 might be per hour means an in-kind contribution of over $1.6 million to our school district, and whereas many unsung heroes on district committees such as after-school task force, school improvement teams, parent-teacher associations, district advisory board, and district advisory committee, technology advisory committee, and many others volunteer countless hours in support of student success. And whereas volunteers serve schools through service organizations and through area businesses, and now therefore, strike that last and, now therefore, we, the Poudre School District Board of Education, do hereby support National Volunteer Appreciation Week, April 23rd through 29th, 2017, and thank the thousands of Poudre School District volunteers who give their time and resources to make a difference in the lives of students. Further, we call upon school administrators, teachers, staff, and students to recognize the important contributions school volunteers make to the learning community. And if the vote is successful, this resolution would be approved and adopted this 11th day of April 2017 by Poudre School District R1, signed by the President Board of Education and attested by the Secretary Board of Education, who I'm not sure is the presiding officer.
I'll second.
Oh. Thank you. Okay, any further discussion on this item before we vote? You may say something.
So read again how many volunteers that was? 22,000?
22,000 volunteers in a district of what, 3,000 to 4,000 employees and 29,000 students?
We almost have as many volunteers as we have students.
Wow.
Incredible. Just wanted to point that out. Every time I do school visits, I did 2 today, there are always volunteers in the buildings.
Okay.
And lots of other volunteers in the district that aren't in the schools, including 7 up here, because none of us are paid, by the way, just so you know. Thank you to the board for all of the hours you all put in.
22,007.
Yeah. Okay, Kyla.
Yes.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you. That brings us to, oh, no. Beth Higgins is here, who is our, what is it? You can tell us your official title, and and thank you for managing all of our volunteers.
Good evening, and my name is Beth Higgins. I'm with the Partnership and Volunteer Office. I'm the Community Partnership Coordinator. Good evening, board. Good evening, cabinet and community members. I will be very brief. As you mentioned in the resolution that's before you this evening, in support of the National Volunteer Appreciation Week, April 23rd to 29th, I want to thank you personally for supporting this resolution and for the great work that our volunteers do. I'm going to share just a little bit of information about our volunteers and about the program. In Poudre School District, as mentioned, we welcome more than 22,000 volunteers who donate more than 72,000 hours of their time and talent in service to our students, the equivalent of 34 full-time staff members. We have volunteers at virtually every school, parents, community members, businesses, organizations that are impacting our kids every single day. Our volunteers range in age from 18 to their mid-90s and come from all backgrounds. Some engage daily, some engage weekly, and some engage just as needed, but the most important thing is they're engaging. Many of our elementary schools, our parents and grandparents, they read to the kids, they assist in the lunchroom and on the playgrounds, they assist with field trips and field days, and they work with our committees and our advisory groups and those sorts of things. In the middles and high schools, our volunteers help with athletics, with the drama club, with clubs that meet during lunch, career development, prom, and even more. The impact on our schools and on our children is immense, and it is powerful. I want to give a quick shout out. How does our school manage, our district manage 22,000 volunteers? We do that with volunteers. So I want to give a shout out to our volunteer building coordinators. They share their time and their impressive organizational skills to coordinate the school and student needs with their community volunteers. They make sure that no school need goes unfilled. Our office managers work closely with our volunteers and our building coordinators to make sure that the process is seamless and positive, and our principals work to ensure that our students experience caring, supportive interactions with all of our volunteers. Clearly, achieving PSD's mission to educate every child every day relies on the important work of every member of this team. We are grateful that our second string includes 22,000 talented, motivated, and caring individuals. Do you have any questions at all that I could answer about our volunteers or the program?
Yeah, I think that math had to be off. The equivalent of 34
At 2,080 hours per year for a full-time employee?
I'm sure your math is wrong, because I
It
know
could
at
be.
least all of us up here probably are the equivalent of two full-time equivalent employees. So I'm just saying it seems to
be.
me like it's a little off, but
I was
because I'd say it's way
told
more.
there was no math, so I did the best.
Okay, well, just checking because, okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate you hanging in there for the long run. And,
Sure. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you to all of the volunteers throughout the district who dedicate thousands and thousands of hours. It's greatly appreciated. That brings us to item 8.2, and I believe we have John McKay here who came back for this item. Thank you, I'm sorry. Migrant Education Program 27-2018 grant application, and I think there were just a couple of questions to answer on this because it got pulled off the consent agenda. Rob?
Good evening.
Did you want to say anything to start with, or?
I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so one question is in the application, it's references something called OSY. Could you explain what that is?
OSY?
Yeah.
I don't know where in the application it references that.
It is in the back somewhere. Hang on, I gotta find it and pull it up now. So while I'm looking for that, the other question was that in the cover sheet it says that the budget has gone down associated with this.
That's correct.
And I guess if you could explain what are the consequences of that and sort of what's the story behind that?
Sure. In the past, we've actually had multiple staffing units being in this application that would allow for a part of a staffing unit for a family liaison based up in Wellington that served Wellington Middle School, Eyestone, because a lot of our migrant families are up in the Wellington community.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also had some central coordination through helping support our parent engagement and intervention program specialists at the elementary level.
Yeah.
And so because of the cuts, we have been unfortunately looking at reducing the family liaison piece and then including that in what we call ELPA staffing, which is English Language Proficiency Act. And so we'll just have our central coordinator at the central office.
So are the cuts as the result of a shrinkage of the prospective grant, or are they the result of some of the budget decisions we've made internally? I guess I'm not clear where the cuts are coming
Sure,
from.
the budget has been cut, and that's because through reauthorization to Every Student Succeeds Act, our allocation as a state has now been based on a formula, where in the past it was frozen in the formula.
Okay.
So we are able to receive substantial support fiscally based on a frozen number. And so now that we have to do different accurate counts as a state, we no longer are able to just base on a frozen number, and so it's more accurate number.
Okay, so it's externally driven that we're getting reduced funding, so we have to do something in response to that.
That's correct.
Okay, fine, thank you. The OSY reference is on there's the service delivery plan focus area, high school graduation dropout prevention, table 4.
Okay.
Item 4F, for example, it's not the only one, but says 80% of migrant OSY will report that they have received useful information and materials from the MEP to assist them in accessing, et cetera, et cetera.
I believe that's out of school youth is the OSY.
Okay, thank you.
So, and I think one of your initial questions was pertaining to why we're not charting graduation rates or dropout rates particular to migrant students. And that's
Yeah.
because the end count is fairly low.
Right.
When we have 39 students total, and then we currently in this graduating class would have 4 students, 2 of them at Poudre High School, 1 at Poudre Community Academy, and then the other at Fort Collins High School. When you have an end count that low, it really doesn't substantiate reliable data. And so if you look at our graduating classes in the future, let's see here. In the class of 2018, you'd have 2 migrant students, 2019, 1 migrant student, and then back to 5 in 2020. So you can't have reliable trend data when you have such low end count numbers.
Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I understand what you're saying. I guess it causes me then to wonder about 4A, right, which says 55% of migrant high school students will graduate by the end, it says by the end of 17-18 school year, and each school year thereafter, 55% of migrant high school students will graduate, right?
That's
so
correct.
I understand the end count.
Sure.
It makes it difficult to make those kind of predictions, yet we are making that kind of prediction, I guess, because we have to.
Through a grant application, they are actually confine us to certain measurable outcomes.
Yeah.
Whether they're reliable or not is not their concern. And so what we try to do
Okay.
is try to indicate the best case scenario for the substantial support that a lot of our migrant students need, knowing the fact that they're some of our most mobile population,
Yeah.
and knowing that we don't know if we'll be able to attain the information, whether they've re-engaged in a learning environment in another state. Migrant student by name is you qualify for migrant because your family is here for agriculture or fisheries work. And so you can be enrolled in lots of different communities and lots of different districts in the state and also other states. So states like Oregon, states like Texas, there's lots of different ways to qualify. And so for this reason, it's really hard to be able to track data.
I understand. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay.
Thank you. May I have a motion?
I move that we, that we
There-
support.
There's okay. No, I was thinking there was language. That's for something else.
Yeah, I move that we vote in favor of the migrant grant proposal that's before us.
I'm sorry,
That's
3
6.
seconds on that. Okay.
I can do that.
We can go ahead and vote then, unless there's any further discussion?
Nate?
Yes.
Christoph?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
Carolyn?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. And that officially brings us to our 10-minute break, which we'll come back in 10 minutes. And John, thank you for coming back in for this. We appreciate it. No, because I need a break. Welcome back to the April 11th board meeting in 2017. We are at agenda item 8.3, which is our new 8.3 because we pulled 6.6 off of the agenda. So 6.6 is fiscal year 18 technology refresh. May I have a motion, please? Christoph.
I move to accept the fiscal year 2018 technology refresh as provided.
May I have a second? Second from David. Okay, any further discussion on this item or questions? Awesome, Kyla. Oh, my apologies, Nate.
As the Luddite on the board, I wholeheartedly support this motion.
Okay, thank you. We will let you use a computer then and won't make you use a pencil for the duration of your term. Congratulations, Director Donovan. Okay, now Kyla.
Aye.
Christoph.
Aye.
Susan.
Aye.
Kathy.
Aye.
Rob.
Aye.
Carolyn.
Aye.
David.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. That brings us to 9.0, discussion items. And first up, we have state and district budget update. And we have Executive Director of Finance, Dave Montoya, here to tell us all about money, which in an educational environment is a very important thing.
Good evening. I am here to provide an update on the budget for the board. We just did a update 3 weeks ago, so some of this may feel somewhat iterative from that or just a regurgitation of that. I've tried to change it up a little bit to indicate where things have changed and where we still have some question. But before we do this, and I've never done this before, so bear with me, we do have a video that we'd like to share.
Hey PSD, ever wonder how your schools get money and what they spend it on? Let's take a look. In Colorado, schools are funded from two primary sources: the state funding formula, which is determined by the state legislature every year, and local revenue, which includes mill levy overrides, property taxes, and vehicle registrations. In the year 2000, Colorado voters said they wanted education funding to increase every year with inflation. But during the recession, the legislature couldn't fund those increases. So beginning in 2009, they applied what's called the negative factor to the state funding formula, giving the state legislature the ability to reduce school funding to balance the state budget. This practice is still in place and means K-12 education gets less money than would otherwise be provided under the Colorado Constitution. For PSD, this is $26 million less in revenue every year. So the money from our two funding sources is what makes up our general fund and is distributed as follows. 100% of every dollar PSD receives goes to supporting students. 50 cents of every dollar is given directly to the schools in the form of student-based budgeting. Schools receive an allocation for every student enrolled at their school. The principal, in collaboration with staff and parents, decides how to use this money to pay for teachers, classified staff, supplies, and more. 35 cents of every dollar supports essential school-based services, including principals and assistant principals and other school operations. That means that 85 cents of every dollar goes directly to the schools to support students. 13 cents of every dollar funds central services, including departments like finance, HR, maintenance, professional development, and many more. And 2 cents of every dollar supports central administration. So to recap, the district receives money from the state for every student. This, coupled with money from property taxes and mill levy overrides, is allocated directly to our schools to support students. For more information, visit www.psdschools.org/knowthebudget.
You don't need to applaud for me. This was all Channel 10, and they're great work. So yes, they are awesome. Isn't that an awesome video? So it's quick, it's to the point, and we're trying to educate folks as to what's going on. So it's probably the first part of a much larger communication campaign around the budget. But I wanted to share that with the board because I really liked the video. And in fact, our budget director, as I'm getting this ready here, our budget director was just floored. He comes from a smaller district, and he was like, that is just fabulous. He was amazed by it. So without further ado, we'll get into the budget update. I will move quickly through some of the slides that are redundant from the last time, and then I'll slow down on some other ones. Key three areas still, this slide really hasn't changed, except we will be reviewing not only the state budget challenges, but I also want to incorporate conceptually the conversation of hitting the base that's been stirring not only in our district, but in other districts and across the state. So I'm going to conceptually talk about that, and hopefully you understand kind of what's happening, what's coming. We'll talk about our plan for restoration of reserves. So this has moved beyond just options for restoration of reserves. We have a plan put together, so we'll review that again, and I don't think it's changed greatly since 3 weeks ago. So, and then last, we'll go through updated budget assumptions, and we'll put those all together to determine how we're getting ready to deliver a preliminary budget in the next board meeting. So the first one, again, this is somewhat redundant, so I'll move through it quickly. We had two forecasts at the state, and both were representing that there was a large gap in the state's funding of about $700 million is what the Joint Budget Committee had penciled in that they needed to solve for. And K-12 was about $370 million of that $700 million gap. So big portion of the gap that the state was dealing with. Again, we went through this in more detail last time, so I'm moving through it quickly. To address this gap, the state is proposing multiple things. One, and probably the largest reduction before K-12, is reductions to Colorado hospitals. So the Joint Budget Committee has put together a plan to help address this gap, but it will mean reductions to Colorado hospitals. Obviously, we're K-12. We're more interested in the second bullet point, what's going on with K-12 and for schools. In this budget plan, they are planning on increasing the negative factor by $51 million. I've heard $48 million today. It's around $50 million is what we're talking about. We have not seen a run, meaning district by district, that determines exactly what this looks like. We do have a run from November that indicates what a $50 million increase would look like back then, and right then it was about $55 per student. So that gives some context as to how much that negative factor increase is potentially going to weigh on the budget once we see the final details. There is some proposed legislative decreases to statutory reserves to help them bring the budget into balance, and they've also done a lot of moving between different budgets and cash funds, carryover funds, whatever you want to call them, to help shore up other programs and to align resources for the priorities outlined in this new budget. So that was pretty much a summary of everything that we had talked about up to the last meeting. Now I want to talk more about this concept of hitting the base. And I believe everybody's at least at some level understanding what this is, whether you've heard it from me or you've heard it at a state meeting or whatever the case. We've had some folks that have put together some modeling, and it's gaining a lot of traction as being very reliable modeling. And so I have not done this modeling, but I want to go through what the modeling is showing. The first thing is, before we even look at it, we have to ground ourselves in some of the assumptions in this model, because all of these will change through time. So to look at this model and say that it's going to accurately predict where we're going to be in 4 years is not a good way to look at this. What it really does is it kind of tells us what is the path that we may be on. And I really like the analogy that was mentioned to me by a board member earlier about a hurricane path, because I think it really is kind of what we're talking about here. Is we've identified that there's a storm brewing out in let me get my oceans correct, Atlantic, and we can see this. You can see it on the radar, and so this is where we're at. We see the storm coming. Now there's a lot of different paths that this storm can take, and it depends on what the legislature does. It depends on what we might do at the ballot box. It depends on how we might balance the budget and how we make our priorities at the state level. But really what this is doing is it's saying we see the storm coming. We don't know exactly where it's going to land, but we need to prepare for it. And so I think it's a good analogy, and I really like the visual image of just seeing a storm out in the Atlantic. And we've all seen that, where the radar picture shows it could go this way, it could go that way. Well, that's what we're trying to figure out right now, is where is this going to hit? Okay. So when we look at the modeling and when we think about that conceptually, just think about that hurricane forecast, we have to understand what the rules are behind the modeling. The first one is that they're assuming that inflation will grow at 2.5% each year. This is important because this is where the base increases annually, and 2.5% is in my estimate, is a good assumption. Now, is it going to be 2.5 every year? No, one year it's going to be 3, another year might be 2, but on average it's about 2.5% moving forward. Another big one, and I put an asterisk behind this because I think it is something we need to be aware of in the modeling. The modeling itself makes a very broad assumption that per pupil amounts will not increase in future years. Now, that's already been potentially proven wrong with this year's action, so we'd have to update that modeling to reflect it. It doesn't change the outcome of whether the storm's going to materialize or not. It just changes the trajectory. It may be that it's delayed another year because the legislature took some action and actually provided some inflationary increase this year, minus the $50 million negative factor increase. It's important for us to just understand that that's how this modeling is doing, and I don't believe that that's going to be exactly what happens from year to year. But the modeling does predict that there's a point where the state can no longer fund the formula. So we'll look at that a little closer in another graphic, I think. Another assumption the modeling's making, and this is a calculation, it's not really an assumption, but there's approximately $900 million of factors left for the state to cut before they hit base funding purely. So that's another key piece of this modeling. And then just for awareness, not that it's an assumption in the model, but if we were to look at this current day, right now, how far is PSD above the base? We're about $600 per kid. And so we are closer to the base than many districts, but we still have a little bit ways to fall before we get to the base. So this may not seem like it's making a whole lot of sense. Hopefully these graphics will improve upon what I'm setting up here. Again, we need to understand the assumptions because I think you can poke holes in some of these assumptions, or you can say that's not exactly the way I'd think about it. That's fine. I think we can run various different variants of the model and see that the outcome really doesn't change a whole lot. It just may delay the outcome. Again, I'm going to reiterate this. All of this can change, whether it be through legislative action, constitutional changes, changes to the budget priority. Any of it's all up in the air. So instead of giving you a bunch of numbers, because that did not seem like it was working well as I was talking about it, what I decided to do was put together a graphic that I think encapsulates the concepts of what we're talking about here. So one of the first things is distinguishing between what we call base funding and factor funding. What this graphic displays is each district, line by line, from lowest PPR, per pupil revenue, to highest per pupil revenue. And what it does is it distinguishes between how much of that is guaranteed base funding versus how much of that is factors. Okay? So you look at this chart, and it actually had me scratching my head for a few minutes, and that's why I added another bullet point in here, is this chart is almost a little bit misleading if you don't think about what it's saying. All this is saying, this is the per pupil amounts per kid, but without this other arrow, I think you lose a lot of context on this graphic. What I did is I just looked and I summed up half of the way through the districts, lowest end to the top end, or to the middle, and in that line where that vertical line is there, and the arrow that says 96% of all students onto the side, that's where the majority of the students are. So to look at this graphic and say this is a distribution of the revenue is not a good way to look at this. What this is a distribution of the per pupil amounts each district's getting, but recognize those districts on the extreme right of this graphic are going to be those extremely small districts. So in magnitude of revenue or budget, they're not as big. This is an important concept because it's what makes all the districts hit the base so quickly. Okay? So what are we talking about here? Conceptually, this is pretty easy. The state has limited revenue and limited resources, and we see this time and time again, year after year. The negative factor is either increasing or staying static. We know that there's limited resources from the state and that they're going to be needing to be pushing down on what's available. At the same time, our base in the formula is increasing by inflation annually. So if you think about those two dynamics, what happens over time is the base grows with inflation. But because the state does not have enough to keep up with that, what they're having to do is they're going to have to start chipping away at the red bars, and in this place you can see that this would be at these smaller districts, and this is not meant to be drawn to scale or anything, it's just drawn for conceptual knowledge only. What this is going to show is that we're going to have to start chipping away at that pink area or the red area to continue to fund the blue area, and at some point those two pinch together and the blue is what you're left with. Okay? Now, why I wanted to mention this 96% error is to look at this graphic and say, wow, we've got a lot of factors to still cut through is a little bit erroneous, because you have to multiply it by the number of kids in each district. When you do that, the revenue picture on the left side is enormous compared to what's on the right side. So when the left side starts lifting or the base starts growing, the factors disappear extremely quick because they're targeted to a smaller piece of the revenue. Does that make sense to folks? Because that's conceptually very important. And honestly, it had me scratching my head for a little bit, because I was looking at this graphic the wrong way when I first put it together and said, okay, well, if we're increasing the base, then we should be able to carve this pink portion of the red off and fit it under there. That's not right, because 96% of the revenue is flowing in the lower half of this graphic. Okay. So looking at those graphics and thinking of those conceptually, and again, I promise that we're not going to go through all the numbers tonight, but I want to go through some of the big ideas of this analysis, of which will be further fine-tuned. And again, I'm underlining this is given the assumptions I outlined before. The first one is Poudre School District could be one of the first districts to hit the base. This, I alluded to this at the last board meeting. We're a floor-funded district, meaning we already get the lowest per-pupil revenue possible in the school finance formula. So it makes sense that we would be one of the first districts to hit the base. And according to this modeling, it could happen in 1920. Again, understand this is the graphic of the hurricane path, and these years could ebb and flow depending on what happens at the state capitol and then the state constitution, if anything there. So PSD could be funded at the base. I think I'm just reiterating that there. From fiscal year 1920 to 21-22, the state will need to reduce districts above the base to lift those that are below. So that was that graphic that I was trying to describe in a visual. At this point, the analysis would indicate that the formula is broken and can no longer support the formula that we have. Okay? When we look at the modeling and we look at 21-22, it indicates that at that point, given the assumptions, I'm going to really highlight that, given those assumptions, that because the lift is so great and there's not enough left in that right hand of the graphic, that there's a point where all 178 districts hit the base almost at once. And so that you can see that happens pretty quickly from that fiscal year 20 year to the fiscal year 22 year. So it doesn't take long for that to happen. The first year, there's only 14 districts. Within the course of 3 years, we're seeing all 178 districts drop to the base, okay, given the assumptions that are outlined. So that is hitting the base, and I wanted to spend a little time with that with the board, not only just to try to drive the concepts home, but also to share with our community what's on the forecast and what we're looking at and why we're talking about this, because this is something we need to prepare for many years in advance. And we need to be very thoughtful about how we do that. So I wanted to spend some time as to why we're talking about budget concerns going forward beyond just the budget year next year. Again, this slide hasn't changed at all. So we have not introduced a School Finance Act yet. Heard from folks today that may be coming early next week, of which we will be excited to see. We're also not anticipating any major changes from what the Joint Budget Committee put together to what the School Finance Act may materialize as, but I cannot stand at the podium and guarantee that. Obviously, the legislatures will do what they will do, but that's what we're hearing, is not to expect many changes from when that act is introduced, so that's good news. Federal funds, I actually put this slide together with John McKay earlier today, and so I'm glad that he was actually had the opportunity to come up and talk a little bit more in detail than what I would do. Let's not lose sight of the fact that federal funds are also taking reductions from the federal level. John put together some bullets for me, so I'm not going to go through this whole slide. Basically, John did a good job of summarizing already. We're making adjustments where we can. We're trying to keep programming where it is for schools, but we are having to make some adjustments because of the reduction in federal funds that is happening externally, not due to internal budget decisions. We have not received our allocations yet for our federal funds. Usually we do receive those in early April. We're hearing that will be, John said, early to mid-May. I heard mid-May. So we have actually put some contingency plans with our title schools to understand that there might be a range of where that staffing is. We've actually been, Assistant Soups and I have been busy, and will be busy for the next 2 days, meeting with every school in the district to review their budget plan for next year. And those schools that are impacted have been informed and are prepared and understand what's coming, at least for next year, title for the federal funds. Restoration of PSD reserves, exact same slide as last time, have not changed it. We have a fund balance policy that is calling for anywhere from 3 to 5%, of which is $7.5 million to $12.5 million. I had indicated last time that we shouldn't target the low range, we should target maybe more mid-range, of which I am pleased to say that we have a plan together to bring reserves back into an acceptable level. The first one, we'll just walk through this again briefly because we've already looked at this to some extent before. We are projecting, without any action, to end the fiscal year with $600,000 in reserves. We talked a lot about that. We have identified and swept $4.3 million from school and department carryovers. About $700,000 of that came from schools, and about $3.6 million came from central departments. This was not a sweep of all carryover. We did not sweep any carryover below 10% of the school or department's annual budget allocation of 10% or less. I don't know if I said that right. It sounds like I said a lot of words there. So we did not sweep anything under 10% for those schools that had carryover underneath that. We're talking about carryovers in excess of 10%, which got us this $4.3 million. We've also talked about reducing the Board of Education contingency reserves, very similar to what schools and departments are doing. Not exactly the same thing for the board, but along the common thread, reducing that contingency reserve, and also retaining and not spending the mill levy override from next year. These are high-level concepts here. As we were talking in detail about this, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we won't retain all $2.6 million of the revenue here. We do need to allocate some to the charter schools on a pro rata basis, so that would be roughly about 93% of that 2.6 is what that number really will materialize as. But long story short, we're under $10 million above where I was hoping to be at a minimum of 9, so I'm pretty pleased with where we're at. And I believe we've done good work on this. Hard work, but good work. Let's go through the budget assumptions quickly. None of these have changed from the last time, so still factoring in 2.8% inflation. We are factoring in student growth of 0.34%, so much more compressed than our traditional 1.5% that we've been growing traditionally. I'm still using, I alluded to this earlier, I'm still using old numbers and stale numbers in these. I'm pretty confident in them. But just give me a little leeway when the School Finance Act does hit, that there may be some minor adjustments as we get the real print on paper as to what's going to happen. But I think we're in the ballpark. We're projecting that the change with the negative factor increase could be yielding about $5.8 million more to spend next year in next year's budget. We are also factoring in retirement differential of $1.4 million, very similar to last year. And we're seeing the same trend for the retirement paper coming in this year. We will continue to feel cost pressures, so we do have some growth, even at a compressed growth rate. We also have para that is increasing annually according to statute. This is the last statutory increase that we need to plan for, unless there's other future ones on the horizon, of which is possible. And then we get into our negotiated cost drivers. So right now we're looking at health and dental increases of 5%. That's roughly just about $700,000 for the employer. Employees that have a spouse or children covered under the plan would also have to pay some additional increase on that also. Also contemplated or being discussed are lane changes for licensed employees. That's an increase for the amount of education they have, and an equivalent provided to ACE and PACE for market adjustments. A step cost is also being considered at $3.8 million. This is a reflection of increase for the years of service that an employee on the license schedule would have, and an equivalent dollar amount to ACE and PACE would be provided to move people through their ranges because their salary schedules are structured differently. And then just to note, any cost of living adjustment for every 1% we add, there's about $1.6 million in cost for that COLA. We've also targeted, since we've last talked 3 weeks ago, we've also targeted $800,000 of ongoing reductions to help really two things. One, to help balance the budget next year, and two, to help restore district unassigned reserves. So that's kind of a twofold piece there, and Cabinet has been reviewing a reduction plan, and we were making some minor adjustments, and we'll communicate that plan out when we're ready, and when it's finalized, we're not quite there yet. Okay. So let's put this all together. This is something I didn't do in the last presentation, is when we take the revenue, add in our retirement differential, I'm going to call it revenue, I think it's clearer this way. It's an offset to expense. And the ongoing reductions, we're targeting increases of about $8 million. We have the pieces that have already been allocated out for student-based budgeting. For para, we need to set that aside. And then we really get into some of the negotiated items, so the health, license, lane change, step. And in this scenario, we would do the 5% for health, license, lane changes, and equivalents for ACE and PACE, and the step equivalent, or step and the equivalent for ACE and PACE. In this scenario, if we did all that, that would leave us $1.33 million left unspent after all of that is done. Okay? So where we're at in negotiations, and without kind of giving up all the work that we've done quite yet, we're really talking about options that may fit within that 1.33 at the bottom and split up between a COLA and reserve restoration or some combination thereof. Okay? So it wouldn't be one or the other necessarily. I think we're really approaching this collaboratively and understanding there probably needs to be some COLA increase, although we may want to wait to understand what exactly where our budget comes in at. We had a very unexpected decrease in enrollment this year that caught us all off guard. And so we're even talking about contingency language that would delay that decision maybe until after we know that for sure. So those are some of the concepts we're kicking around in negotiations. Negotiations, the larger circle did task a smaller group to do some what they call straw design work, and so we are doing that work. In fact, we're meeting tomorrow night to further discuss those straw designs that have been developed. But that's really where I think the budget's landing, at least at this point. And so I believe we're on track for getting a budget ready for 17-18. What we need to be prepared for is that, again, that hurricane plot on what's going to happen in the future. Always want to emphasize our focus areas within the budget. I read these last time, so I won't read them again. And then finally, budget process timeline. It's always good to introduce the budget process timeline. Since we've last met, the Budget Advisory Committee has met once. We've also met with tactical leadership and others at least twice, I believe now. So we're in process of doing some of those meetings, and now that we're actually gathering some information to take to them, that the meetings are actually getting pretty exciting. So, and then a budget timeline. We're in the April-May zone, so hopefully we can finalize negotiations and get a School Finance Act introduced and finalized. So those are the big points or the big hurdles in front of us, at least for next budget cycle. And then I can take questions at this point.
Rob.
So I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
One of them is, for your hitting the base slides, is the assumption that school funding is self-contained? Meaning, the way you described it, you know, we have to take things out of the factors to to make the base go up, right? And I don't know what the legalities of this are, and I'm sure the politics are very difficult, but if, for example, they found money somewhere else in the budget to throw into the base, that's not thought about in these slides this way,
Yeah,
right?
that is not an assumption. I mean, one of the assumptions is that it's a,
It's a zero-sum game on this.
yeah, but I don't know that the model itself is making that assumption. I think we're making that assumption broad, or the people that have put this together, broader, the fact that we see the trend of not getting increases to K-12 time and time again. So I think you're, I'm not discounting what you said.
No,
I think
I'm
you're,
just
I
trying
think
to
you're right.
understand.
I think there's,
So is there not any assumption that state revenue is going to go up by economic growth to provide, and that some percentage of that revenue is going to flow to education as opposed to,
that's my understanding as I look at this
Okay.
scenario. And again, I think that as we begin our strategic planning, I
Yeah.
may take some concepts from this, but I may want to modify and improve it.
I
And
understand.
I would imagine all the districts will be participating in that.
No, I understand.
But it's good to understand the assumptions and what's in here and what's not, because you can
Right.
quickly go down the wrong road if you think there's assumptions in there that really aren't.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification, and I certainly understand and accept the fact that some of what I just talked about may change the timing of when some of this stuff happens, but we're heading on this trajectory, and it's not that far out, whether it's 2019 or 2021 or whatever. We're gonna, in the lifetime, let me put it this way, in the lifetime of some of our kids who are currently in kindergarten, we're gonna be at the base, unless something changes
Yeah.
with regard to the way the state handles its finances.
Yeah, and I think the example you brought up is a really good one, and I actually mentioned it when I was doing the presentation, that already the analysis in this work needs to be updated, because the state did exactly what you described. They cut hospitals to put more money to K-12. So
Yeah.
that's not reflected in any of the numbers that are generating this
Sure.
modeling or the graphics I've got up here. But those are things that we need to factor in, and those are options available to the legislature
Up
to do
to
that.
a point, right?
Up to a point.
Then there are some obligations that we have that are not
Absolutely.
tenable, well, are either not legal because of federal entanglements, if you want to call it that, or are not tenable, like, I don't know, shutting down the prison system or something, or
Correct.
the judicial system. I mean, it's not going to happen.
There's only so much
Yeah,
that you
there's
can
only
do
so
in the
much
state's
flexibility.
budget.
So I get it. Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to just emphasize, and it's on your slides, but I don't think you mentioned it, is this possibility of Senate Bill 1761.
Oh,
which
yeah,
is,
I did gloss over that.
Yeah, which is it sounds, depending on where you sit, it sounds like a swell idea, but the net effect of this could be, if it passes, that we're going to get hit, that the district schools are going to have to take $1.5 million out of each year out of our budget and transfer that to the charter schools, which I suppose is a swell thing for the charter schools, but it has, I mean, if you go back to the other slide that says we only have $1.33 million left over
Yeah.
after all those things, we'd have minus $200,000 left over
If
if we had to do that this year.
If it all came in at once, yes.
And oh, by
absolutely.
the way, that last slide, that last bullet, I think, is also important, where it talks about any new charter schools would cause further future diversions of existing allocations, which means that if we approved a charter school for next year or for the year after, right, that would add to the total of money that we need to give away from the existing. We don't get any additional revenue for that. We take our existing revenue and we take some more out of it and we hand it to the new charter school. And again, I understand theoretically the appeal of that, but when we have a zero-sum set of finances to be working with that's declining, it's very scary from the school district point of view.
And not to interrupt your train of thought, but something else that doesn't contemplate, a lot of people don't understand that there are two different categories of charter schools. There are charter schools that are chartered by the district, and there are charter schools that are chartered through the state for whatever reason. And we have 3 of those schools here in our district, and basically what Senate Bill 61 would say is that the state would go ahead and take money out of its general fund to put the equivalent of what it would get if it were a district charter school into the budget. So basically, you would be responsible in your taxes for paying for whatever some other local district had decided to give to its charter schools in its mill levy override. So basically, it's taken away total local accountability and total local control because of this. And it would decrease the overall size of the general fund, which is what gives money to our schools, and so it further drives down the total amount of money available to all the schools and makes that base coming, the hitting the base a lot faster than it would otherwise be.
Right.
Just, I don't want to forget that point, because we have at least 3 of those charter schools right now. We have no control over if they are in our district or not, because that is not a decision that districts are given any control over.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do want to emphasize, as you do on your slide, that we already provide mill levy funding as per our agreements with charter schools, district charter schools, that were in existence at the time, generally, that were in existence at the time the mill levy passed. So we try to, basically what that allows us to do, frankly speaking, is to account for the funds in our mill levy calculations. And this, if it passed, would basically cause us to have an expenditure that we did not expect, a significant expenditure that we had no reason to expect. And so,
And going down that line of thought, you made me think of something I hadn't thought of before, is that, take our 2010 mill levy, for example, although that one's one we are splitting, but let's assume we weren't. We've got static budgets that define choice and innovation grants, tech refresh, all of these things that we're doing, and what this Senate bill could do if we weren't allocating those on a pro rata basis, it could require it, and it would require us to go in and adjust those budgets down to say, okay, now instead of getting $300,000 in choice and innovation grants, you're getting 200 and some thousand. It's going to be some reduced amount because we're having to provide more money to the charter schools from a finite pot of revenue from our mill levy override. I believe that, I mean, obviously this bill has not passed yet. It's actually been delayed because they want to work on the budget in the School Finance Act first, but this is a big piece, and the reason why it's on my slide. You know, if this ends up happening, I would imagine, it may not be our district, but I would imagine there's going to be some district out there that'll challenge this in the courts to say, how can you change what the voters had originally authorized? And we'll have to see how that goes.
Dr. Smyser.
In the legislation, does it specify or contemplate how to make sure that the charters who are going to use that money follow the intent of the ballot measure? Because the ballot measure says what we can spend it on, and we track that.
I was trying to re-envision the bill in my head, and I don't believe it does unless somebody has knowledge.
Actually, well, yes, it does. You have to. So, for instance, if you had said, we're going to, in your ballot language, you were going to spend the mill levy override money, let's say, on all-day kindergarten funding, then, yeah, you would have to spend it that way. I mean, you would still, if you had charter school kids in kindergarten, you would have to share that with them. But or if there were a program that they didn't have, my understanding was that it wouldn't have to go that way.
Okay, because perhaps they don't want to do that, whatever that thing is.
And so I think the devil's going to be in the details in this one, and how it gets put into practice.
Nate.
I think Dr. Smyser was just stating one of the arguments that might be made in a lawsuit, because I don't think the bill is specific enough to resolve that question.
Yeah, so we'll wait and see. Obviously, from a budget standpoint, we prefer that this bill does not pass this year, because it does create more hardship that we've got on the horizon too, so. And it's at a time where we're already dwindling our revenue down, and to dwindle it further just doesn't make a lot of sense to me right now.
Other questions for Dave? Thank you very much, Dave. We really appreciate
Thank you.
your time. We do not shoot the messenger here, so be grateful.
I'm glad.
No, thank you very much. We appreciate everything you do to keep us solvent. Okay, I'm going to take all kinds of grief for that, aren't I? Okay, my apologies. Let's get on to 9.2, which is policy review for our governance process policies. What the governance process policies are, those are policies that the board basically says it has to abide by. And while there are no reports written for these like there are for some of our executive limitation policies, we do like to review them every year just to make sure that these are still good working practices for the board. So let's just go through them one by one if that's acceptable. 3.0, General Governance Process Policy. If I'm just going to make a slight pause between each one, so if people have questions or thoughts on them, hold up your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. Is everybody to where they can look? Okay, are there any suggested changes for GP 3.0? May I move on? Okay. 3.1, which I just lost. I need to find it again. Sorry about that. I thought I was very organized. What's that one called? So I'm just going to borrow this one. That one is Governing Style 3.1. Does anybody have any thoughts or suggestions on this one? Christoph or Susan? Susan.
Good question. Good suggestion came up. Perhaps rather than going through one by one, is there a possibility, since we've read them and we would have our notes, to just say, are there any that we would like to make corrections to?
That sounds good. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. Does anybody have any of the policies they would like to see changes to? I did have a couple of things I thought we should, I'm sorry, but I do have a couple of things which I had in my notes here if I could find them. Sorry about that. Collecting way too much paper. Does anybody have the email I sent out earlier? Well, I remember one of them. One of them is on the boards. Which one was that? It was the board committees. Basically, we need to tweak it. So if people would be amenable, maybe it would be acceptable if we went back and if you looked through the list of committee liaisons that, thank you. I was trying to be organized. I didn't succeed. Yes, so at the end, the audit committee is still active, the district advisory board is still active, the district accountability committee is still active. On the Colorado Association of School Boards official delegate and legislative network, that actually, the legislative network doesn't really exist anymore, and those are really two different things. So the official delegate to CASB is one thing, and then legislative network, so there's two things. There's a Legislative Resolutions Committee for CASB, which is really up to CASB to appoint somebody, and we may or may not have somebody from our board on that group at any given time because there's a lot of boards, and so I think we have to take that off. The other thing that Legislative Network could be referring to, no, that's because that's our coalition down here. We don't really have a coalition anymore, so that needs to be removed because now we just have our subcommittee of the board that is our legislative committee. So yeah, so those are, I think, the two things. We still have Policy Council, Early Childhood Policy Council, Early Childhood Council of Larimer County, Foundation Board of Directors. Susan, do you still have the Faith Community Volunteer Program? It's not existent anymore? Okay, so I would think that those are the 3 things that we should change. Are people amenable to us just coming back with a revised draft of
On
those items?
consent, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And my apologies, I can't find where I did this. I printed it out. I emailed it to everybody, to the entire board. I'm really sorry, everybody, but there were 2 other items.
Okay, well, while you're looking for that, maybe I can bring up the other question that I had.
Go ahead.
And that is that under 3.5, Section 2D, a district employee who becomes a candidate for the board shall automatically be deemed to be on extended leave of absence during his or her candidacy, et cetera, et cetera. We had a recent example of that in terms of running for this board, as a matter of fact. And I understand, though I wasn't directly involved, that there was some confusion over that. And I'm wondering whether that policy accurately reflects what we want to have happen in that circumstance. Or what, you know.
Yeah, so what happened, there was just, oh, go ahead, Nate, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, that involved me, and I was a district employee, and I attempted to invoke that portion of the board policy, but under the employee agreement, apparently it stated that it states that you have to have been employed for a certain period of time before you're eligible to be placed on the status of extended leave of absence, and I was not eligible for that, so I don't think it was necessarily an issue that needs to be resolved.
Well, what happened with that is that board policy overrides that employee agreement, and we determined after some pushback to understand where that actually was, because basically you were given bad information. And then we tried to correct it, and I think you said, no, I don't want to start the year if I'm not going to finish it anyway. So I think that's where it ended up. So it was really a misinterpretation of which thing overrode which within the from the administration. And I think it just needed to be clarified and resolved, and we should have done it more quickly. Christoph.
Nate, when you resigned, did you do it automatically or voluntarily?
I did it voluntarily.
Okay, just
So-
checking, because it should have been both, automatically and voluntarily, so if you read the language.
Well, I resigned
Okay, just checking.
prior to, yeah. But I don't really think I don't think the board policy needs to be revised.
Okay, fine.
Because I don't think it will become an issue if there's a determination by the board and the district in the future that board policy overrides the employee agreement, then we'll deal with it at that point. But I think it'll be a distinction without a difference.
It's on the record now, that's fine. That's clear with me now, thanks.
And I know the other thing that you said that you were wondering about if we need to discuss these every year, and I think it's important just because if we discuss them in public, at least it means everybody reads them once a year, and frankly, sometimes we don't read them. And for instance, so here are my next 2 things. Thank you for looking at my email, David. I apologize for being a little bit discombobulated. On 3.3, which is titled Agenda Planning, it talks about this for the board cycle of agenda planning. The cycle will conclude each year on the last day of October, so that administrative planning and budgeting can be based on whatever, and then it talks about the first quarter of the cycle will start in November. We don't plan agendas that way. We kind of talk about them throughout the year, but we also talk about them really at our June retreat for the upcoming calendar year, and I really think that that should be amended because it's not how we do business right now. So I would suggest that maybe we, as we write one policy, we ought to come back with revisions for this policy as well. Is that acceptable to people? And then the last one was 3.8, and maybe this is something that we should really bring back at our retreat because it's on self-monitoring. And We're back to again where nobody seems to want to do what we were doing for self-monitoring, which is sort of to review things on a regular basis every retreat. So I'm not sure where we want to go with that, but it would be another. This is just a really hard one. Over the years before I was on the board, since I've been on the board, we keep trying different things. It never seems to work terribly well. We had a really great session with an outside person in January, which worked well. So I guess I would like to get some direction from the board, perhaps in June, on where we want to go with this. Rob?
Yeah, and I'm happy to discuss it at length in June or whatever.
But not tonight.
No, but I will point out that some of our challenge in spending the appropriate time in board self-monitoring has to do with our time management as well, right? I mean, fundamentally, those retreats, as you noted earlier in this meeting, are booked to the hilt, and this tends to be the last thing on the agenda, and so we run out of time. And that may be the right priority call, but it's also a reality. So when we talk about this, we need to talk about how we schedule and how long we schedule for and whatever. It's something weird. Yeah.
Someone's talking to us.
And as for your other as for the other thing you brought up from my email about doing, having all the conversations about the reports and the policies and things in public, I understand the point you're making. My proposal, to the extent it's a proposal at all, is not limited to these policies, but in fact to all the monitoring reports, and we would need to identify which ones we think are most important to do in public and which ones are not, if in fact we're open to having any of them. And by the way, when I say not in public, I don't mean the information would not be available to the public. I mean, we just wouldn't spend 15 minutes doing whatever here on things that generally there's no controversy or no questions on. I don't know that I want to.
We do ask people to spend time putting them together. So I would suggest that what we do is, again, when we come back in June at our retreat, board norms is one of the things that's on the agenda.
That's fine.
And I think that would be an appropriate place to discuss that's a board norm. Do we want this to be on the agenda every year, or do we not?
And I'm happy to have the conversation then. Thank you.
Christoph, and then Nate.
So, I think it's both these things, the 3.3 and 3.8. Are you suggesting changes tonight? I'm not clear.
Suggesting changes tonight. I'm suggesting that perhaps we just go back and draft something to the effect of what I talked about, and then we change it. But not for 3.8, because 3.8 we need to have more board discussion.
Who would draft the other two?
Well, I think probably what I would do is get together with Tom Crabb and discuss what we actually wanted, because he's the good guy to, and once he understands what we want, to give us good wording for it, if that's acceptable to folks.
All right. I would, I guess we'll discuss this more in June. I understand. Traditionally, I mean, I feel like we have had some success just going ahead and going through these and making the changes as needed. I don't know if it matters. One thing about the board meetings is we're actually here, and we have time. I don't see such a big problem with it as long as we're pretty efficient about it. So as we kind of jump to, if we have 10 of these, we're not reading them out loud. If people have suggestions, bring them up and let's go through them. If we wait till a retreat, we would use an entire retreat to have these discussions, I fear. So, and that's why I'm asking about these two. I don't know if you wanted to actually pursue those changes or not.
I think 3.3 I do want to pursue. 3.8 we would need guidance from the rest of the board on what. And 3.
I think 3.8 could be as simple as changing may include rather than will include, and it's just giving suggestions to the board of what we could do, for example, right? It wouldn't have to be very complicated to change.
Well, sure. And maybe people are fine with it the way it is, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But 3.3 and 3.6, I think that would be appropriate to draft changes to those and bring them back.
Okay.
And probably on the consent agenda, since we agree in principle, if that's all right. Okay, great. So, Nate, I'm sorry.
I agree with you, Madam President, on 3.3 and 3.6. As to 3.8, it's an encyclopedia that's dense and largely unworkable, in my opinion. So if we change will to may, then we can ignore it going forward. Because we haven't really dealt with it in the 18 months. What's that? Yeah, I'm proposing that too. Yeah.
Okay.
So in the 18 months I've been on the board, we haven't gone through that sort of navel gazing, I don't think. So.
So is there a proposal, I'm not going to call it a motion, but a proposal on the floor to come back with revised wording to the effect of that says may, and then we can continue from there? Christoph and then Rob.
Okay, now this is starting to look like the old, the way we used to do this, where we'd hash at words. I would recommend that we leave, the board will systematically monitor itself, because I think there's some value to that. But we could add just a tiny bit of language that would say, you know, the board may choose from the following items, you know, or, you know, suggestions are, and then we move on. It could still remain fairly simple. But it would I think I saw it in 3.3, if we could just find ways to be less prescriptive, right? I think the guidance is still useful to future presidents and future boards of what the expectations are. I'll throw that one out.
Rob.
Yeah, I think we need to take a step up from that, frankly. I think we need to understand what it is we want out of board self-monitoring and what we're prepared to do, you know, in terms of time and concept in order to accomplish that. And then have the wording reflect that, rather than to tweak the words to allow us to do whatever we want, because that frankly doesn't answer the question about what we're going to do going forward, what we should be doing, what we feel like we should be doing.
Okay, well, if it's acceptable, let's just bring it back and talk about it in June, and we will, everybody think about it so that we don't have to have a 3-hour conversation about it in June, okay? Maybe we'll come up with something smart in between now and then. Okay, so I think, unless anybody has anything else on 9.2? 9.3, legislative discussion. So the legislative committee met tonight prior to the board meeting, and I did find that piece of paper. I think what we did is we actually went through the various education-related bills and narrowed down the ones that we're kind of focusing on right now. House Bill 1181 and House Bill 1294. 1181 is basically reducing the testing in high schools, takes PARCC out of high schools, replaces it with just a SAT and PSAT and PPSAT, or whatever we call those. 1294 is the bill that we mentioned earlier, which would allow us to include ASCENT students in our graduation calculations. So those two things are the legislative committee and the board, I presumably the board are in favor of, so say if you're not. Senate Bill 61, which we were just discussing up here, we are opposed to, and we are focused on that one. Senate Bill 200 is going to be up in committee tomorrow. I will be down there. I'm not sure if I'll be able to testify on it or not, but if I'm able to, I will. Basically, that wants to take 1% of the general budget for education and put it towards schools that are already doing well. And it's like, I can't even explain what a stupid idea that is. So I will attempt to, if I am able to, testify in front of committee tomorrow. 267 is basically a rural bill, but one of the things it will do is it will reclassify the hospital provider fee from being in the general budget to the general fund to be in an enterprise zone, which is something, enterprise fee, which is something we've wanted, or account. However, one of the things it will also do right now is it will lower the cap on what we're allowed to retain from the referendum C by the same amount. So basically, we're taking an amend position on this, which basically would say, don't lower the cap. That completely nullifies taking the hospital provider fee money and sticking it into an enterprise fund. It just makes no sense. We would like this to pass if they are able to amend it without reducing the cap, and that's sort of the stance we're taking. And of course, we are following the long bill, which is the regular money bill that's going through the legislature, and then we will be keeping hopefully close tabs on the School Finance Act, which we expect to be introduced Friday or Monday perhaps. Comments on other legislation? Nate?
I would like to invoke the Coen brothers and the Dude to say that your statement about a legislative bill being a stupid idea is just like your opinion, man.
You're right, it is just my opinion, man, but my opinions are right. Okay, just as long as we're clear on that. If anybody would like to disagree, I'll arm wrestle you after this. Okay, any other thoughts or suggestions, comments for the good of the order? Okay, let's move on to item 10.0 then, which is agenda planning. Does anybody have any items that you would like to consider adding to future agendas? I know we did talk about bringing the topic of, I don't know how we want to describe it, from our Innovation Schools discussion back at our June retreat. And we're going to talk about everything at the June retreat. I think it's going to start about 1 a.m. and end about midnight. So, okay. But do we want to title that in any particular way? Or shall we come up with something creative? I'm sorry, Nate.
I would propose that since we're going to be talking about innovation schools, and that's kind of like choice and charters, that we invite Dr. Lambert to our retreat.
Anybody's always welcome, but sure.
Okay.
He looks thrilled to death by that. And I heard it's going to be 23-hour retreat, so.
Okay, well, just try not to get the 1 a.m. slot.
Okay. The only thing about that
Rob.
innovation piece is, whatever we call it, I want to make sure that it's sort of the broader conversation. I don't want it to be, personally anyway, I don't want it to be focused on the act and how we can use the act or not use the act or whatever. I want to be focused on the broader question of innovation, how that relates to what we're doing in the schools, in our own schools to innovate, what the perception within the system is to innovate, and how that relates to some of the charter conversation we had earlier.
Can we call it how we support school of choice in PSD? Okay, we will come up with a suitable title with that kind of theme. Thank you.
Excellent,
Any
thank
other
you.
topics that we wish to discuss? And David?
I don't know where we fit it in, but we did have that 2 weeks of meetings over at Holy Family and some sort of report of what the findings were from that. And they're going to meld the discussion from the 11 tables into one report and then I think give it to us and we'll get it.
Well, we have a work session next time. If it's available then, and we can find out, can we just add it onto the next work session where it's available? Is that acceptable to folks to talk about that and talk about where we're going with community engagement?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on agendas and what you would like to hear about, talk about, make jokes about? Carolyn wants to make a joke, okay.
I did have a proposed agenda item. I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but I would like to have an agenda item around IEPs and understanding how IEPs are done. I guess, specifically, I would like to look at our IEP numbers, or whether we're identifying just the right amount, or we seem to be below the state. The state average for IEPs is 10%, and PSD's has 8% IEPs. And I'd like to find out if that's because we're doing things right, or are we an outlier from the rest of the state? Or what's the reason for that? I would like to kind of dig into our IEP numbers and understand them a little bit deeper.
Okay, so I know that Sandra has dug out some of those numbers for us in the past. I guess my question would be, is there anything more that we can learn by digging more into the numbers? Because I thought we were sort of at an impasse as to determining if there were kids who should be on IEPs or might qualify for IEPs that weren't. So I'm not sure, I guess I'm wondering if we'd learn more. And Nate had a comment.
I think that's a really difficult question to answer, and I understand that, and that's why I'm saying maybe we should dig just a little bit deeper. So,
I'd say even if we have a public discussion about what we've talked about so far, it would be helpful to understand the process and what the trends are and how they compare to other districts in the state. Not that we have to get a comprehensive analysis, but I think it's an important public discussion to have. So that's why I would say that it would be good to have that on an agenda rather than leaving it where it sits now.
Christoph?
Could we come up with an agenda item that would be a bit of just a learning on what's involved, and it could be educational for us and for parents in the community around the process that parents go through to get on IEPs, and we can include some numbers for you and kind of review it. And I mean, I might be in favor of something like that if it provided me an opportunity to learn something about in the district. So,
Susan?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I am the board liaison to DAB, and DAB got a wonderful presentation on just different aspects of integrated services, and part of it was the IEP process, and I think that would help us all. I learned a lot, and I would recommend that maybe the board be recipient of that same presentation, because it was excellent.
Okay, Rob?
Yeah, I think I'm in support of having a discussion around IEPs. I think one of the challenges is that difficult question that I guess you raised, Kathy, and was implied in what you were talking about, Carolyn, with regard to how do we know that all the kids who need IEPs are getting IEPs? And as I understand it from the sort of background conversations we've had around this, right, part of that relies on various processes that are outlined in law and in policy around the agreements that need to be made around IEPs, the analysis that needs to be done, the testing that needs to be done to understand whether a student is in need of an IEP, and also the agreements that need to be effectively had with the parents and the educators and whatnot, and that there are opportunities for the parents and whatnot or guardians to object. And so I think understanding that is helpful, and I think frankly understanding how much, if any, pushback there is in the system would also give us a sense of whether that's happening. I understand none of that's determinative because we can't, and it's not our, we can't be sort of reanalyzing every case. That's not our role, and it's not what I'm talking about. But just to get a sense of how the system is working, and are there circumstances where parents have said that's not right, and how does that not, again, obviously not discussing individual students, but statistically or numerically or in terms of data, how's the system working?
Okay, well, it sounds like there's enough interest to stick it on the agenda. Might I suggest, if there are specific questions you have outside of these, that you send them in to Sandra, because if we're going to do this, I would like to make sure that we get the questions answered that people want to have answered. And go ahead. And that we have, and so when we'll have to figure out based on what people want to know when we can do it. Does that sound reasonable? Anything else? Okay, well, that brings us, guess what, to agenda item 11.0, adjournment. And so we are officially adjourned at 10:21 p.m. Congratulations to those of you in our audience who didn't have to be here but stuck through it. Thank you.